Not everyone's a grandmaster. But that doesn't mean these stars aren't some of the greatest creators and people in chess.
Oh,
The poor eval bar.
that was one of the most exhilarating games I've been a part of.
Presenting the best of the best
Oh, the rook!
that aren't the best.
Oh,
Danny.
The I'm Not a GM Speed Chess Championship 2022.
Oh
King.
no!
We've seen the first Botez gambit. What a way to start off.
Everyone would not be proud, Alex.
Watch your favorite creators scramble
and now Levy's up.
It's me, one.
It's me! Rook F1's me!
Oh my goodness.
blunder,
Oh, Queen F7 mate! Queen F7 mate!
and play some brilliancies.
Wait, it's stalemate! What a find! What a find by Lars! That was amazing!
Watch live on chess.com/TV.
Welcome back to the I Am Not GM Speed Chess Championship. I'm Grandmaster Robert Hess. Alongside me today, my good friend Anamaya Kazarian. Anamaya, we have a very fun matchup today in Oh No My Queen, Eric Rosen against Queen of Indian Chess, Tania Sachdev.
You said it right, Robert. Welcome, everyone. I am super excited to be presenting this match together with you, Robert. As you said, it's a very exciting matchup. Both players are really well known to the audience. If not, make sure to check them out because you are gonna see today a very fun match. Both players are really amazing chess players, and I can't wait to see the action start today.
For sure, and I think sometimes we forget that with these content creators, these commentators, they're also exceptional chess players. We got to see that just yesterday when Danny Wrench took down Justice Williams at long last in an Armageddon game. That was really an epic comeback by Danny, and he moves on to the quarterfinals. But today we're focusing in on the bottom right-hand side of our bracket, the 6-11 matchup. And Eric Rosen, he's the higher seed of the two, but Tania, she is very strong.
She is. I remember her when I played in the Reykjavik Open. She was going for the Grandmaster norms over there. So she is definitely a really good chess player. And I'm looking forward to see how she's going to be doing today.
Yeah, and well, she is going to have hours of Blitz and Bullet ahead of her. So we remind everybody of what this event's format is like, because they start with a time control of 5 minutes plus 1 second increment. That is 75 minutes of that. Then we get 45 minutes of the 3+1. And last but certainly not least, 25 minutes of bullet chess. We all love it to see the players struggling just to get their moves off before flagging. And speaking of that, Anamaya, we can bring up the insights brought to us by chessgoals.com and Smarter Chess. These stats here. Look at these predictions. What do you make of them?
I'm not seeing them just Robert, so you have to fill me in with this one.
Okay, let's see. Well, Eric Rosen definitely is the favorite in this matchup. That's undoubted at this point. Undoubted. I guess it's kind of a word, but now I'm thinking about it. But the 5+1 portion, it's predicted at 4-4. So I would imagine that Eric has to be the favorite all time. Charles, he's just more experienced in blitz chess. We see his higher rating, 2635 to 2542. But Tania over the board. I mean, she played really well in Reykjavik, as you mentioned.
Right.
So perhaps that's going in her favor.
Absolutely. So indeed, Eric seems to have the lead in the bullet after all. So it's a really interesting prediction to see the 5+1 and 3+1 so tied on the score. So I'm curious to see how Tania will be doing in the bullet, as the other time controls should be more or less even. Now let's have a look at the insights, Robert.
Yeah, well, you mentioned it. That look at the losses by flag, the percentage of losses by flag, 36% for Tania, still 27% for Eric. So Tania doesn't have that many games relative to Eric, 290 games. That's plenty, but it's what, about, I guess a little bit more than a tenth of Eric's games. So she's not playing as much, but look at her accuracy on my 85% compared to 82% for Eric.
That's pretty high, Robert. That's not too bad. And I think even though she's not so experienced, as we can tell from the amount of games she has played, I still believe because she is a very strong player overall, I think she will still be able to put up a great performance today.
Yeah, she definitely will. We'll see how she starts out because that will be very important. Sometimes if you don't play as much online chess, you start out a little sluggishly and then you can't make up that ground. So the games will be starting in a few minutes. Anamana and I will take a short break, but this is the IMSCC Speed Chess Championship. You will not want to miss what promises to be another fantastic matchup. And we are just about set for this matchup between Eric Rosen and Tania Sachdev. Anamaya, as we've been indicating, these players very well known in Eric's case for all of his streaming and YouTube videos, and for Tania, especially her great commentary. So we know how good they are at talking about chess. Now we'll see how good they are at playing it under the pressure of these matches.
Exactly, Robert. Now we'll have see them face each other. And as we were talking about the players, the game just started and we see the London Eric Rosen's trademark opening.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about that, okay? But what I do want to talk about is look at Eric's rating. He's over 2,700. So when the pairings were put out, it looked like his rating was around 2,635. Now it's 2,713. So he's on the up and up. And for Tania, she doesn't play that much online Blitz, it seems, but she's very strong, obviously. And you mentioned the London system. We have a knight on e5. How are you feeling about this opening?
You know, Robert, I would say since it's Eric's specialty, I would say, it's fine to see London, but generally we would love to see a different opening, a bit, more aggressiveness, but you never know. Maybe you will see a G4 in very soon.
Okay, see, now you're talking. Now you're throwing the pieces forward. I'm happy to hear that. But we're seeing a very solid approach from Eric in game one. He's moving very quickly. And in the 5-minute portion, that may not play as big of a role. But as the time controls get shorter, his lead on the clock, which I assume will be happening throughout the match, could tell the story. But Anamaya, look at this tension in the center. Tania plays knight to e4. And will she be able to play f6 at some point just to kick this pesky knight out of here?
Right. It's indeed, I would rather play knight e4 here in a position, even though you might be worried about bishop takes e4, pawn takes e4, and like it will ruin your pawn search a little bit, but you get a lot of space for that in return. So that's why white is not going for that just yet. And we see pieces being traded off. And I would say this would favor black.
Yeah, I would think so as well. Although after knight takes c6, Tania paused. And there is some potential problems. You mentioned the double pawn. So if white, say, takes on d6, black kind of has to take with the queen. Otherwise, you drop the c5 pawn. And then I would like to take on e4. And also you have double c pawns. Your e pawn is going to be a target when you have to take with this pawn here. So I'm wondering if that's what Eric's going to go for, because he's looking at this. You know, he senses there is something here for him.
Seems like it, and as you mentioned, that will be way too much, the double pawns on 2 files. So instead of taking right away, he goes for queen c2, reinforcing the attack on the knight on e4, and f5 is a very good defensive move.
But it's also strategically a problem. So Eric takes on e4, and we're about to see a knight on e5 that can't be touched. It's a light square bishop. There are no pawns that can go and attack the knight. They can't move backwards. So Anamai, at least from that perspective, this has gone well for Eric. But I feel like, maybe I'm underestimating Tania's chances a little bit.
I'm curious to see how Tania will continue this game, but for now, you might say that this knight on e5 is not doing much, but as soon as black considers taking on d4, there will be c takes d4, and the c6 pawn will become a big target. So that's how the knight on e5 could be used, and is so strong on this square. But on the other hand, if the pawn on c6 will be defended, we will have coverage and everything, then what is actually the power of this knight? It's not that clear. So I'm curious to see if Tania is able to improve her position.
Yeah, and right after that c6 pawn, you mentioned it, Eric goes for it, and the bishop is also under attack. So bishop to b5 takes care of both at once. But the problems will remain. I mean, this bishop not necessarily get trapped on b5, but it gets relatively close. Once you just scoot the queen, play pawn to a4, the bishop is running out of real estate. And at some point or another, it feels like the c takes d4 will have to happen. But as you were talking about, Anamai, that clearly favors white, the knight on e5, and then the opening of the c file.
White has a really comfortable position, and Eric is also up on the clock by a lot already, and we're still in the 5+1 portion, so this difference is not such a big deal, but later on this will hurt a lot if this keeps happening.
Right, and queen a3, is that already a win of a pawn? I mean, you can't take on d4 now, you lose your queen, and if you can't take, isn't white ready just to scoop up this pawn?
Looks like it. Perhaps you might have a move like rook f5, and she does it. She plays rook f5, and she's attacking the knight on e5 that is defended by the pawn on d4. So you can't let go of that knight.
That's actually extremely clever. So it's protecting the pawns not directly, but through some tactical measures. And as we're pointing out, that in the event of a trade on c5, this d pawn will have to move, in which case the knight loses defender. So some people say, well, let me move the knight out the way, so that way I could take the pawn, but you'd be walking to moves like bishop to e2, hitting both the knight and this rook. So don't just go for that c5 pawn. You need to come up with a well-rounded approach here.
This bishop on b5 could be very dangerous. As you mentioned, the bishop has access to the square e2, and potentially if you manage to get a kingside attack started with the heavy pieces, perhaps you could even play bishop f3 and start sacrificing your bishop to open up the king.
Oh, I love the look of that. That's a really clever idea by Anamai here. And okay, Eric wants no part of it. He's preemptively defending the f2 pawn, but also the e2 square, because bishop e2 to f3. Sometimes that really is powerful. And when you're not expecting it, it can kind of sort of catch you off guard and it could hurt. So rook d2, I like that move. And Anamai, what are we going to do? This pin is here. She plays a5. That means the rook gets a little more space. The queen isn't staring all the way down to a7. But what is happening with this pin here and this pawn needing to defend the knight?
It's not so clear. For the time being, white is not able to capture this pawn, so black doesn't need to do anything about this. But perhaps you might want to consider moving the queen to a safer square or defend the queen, so you would want to take on d4 at some point. But for now, Tania is going for a4, trying to solve one of the problems, that being the pawn on the a file being on its own.
Right, because you mentioned protecting the queen so that you can move the c5 pawn, but then that a5 and before that the a7 pawn was under attack. So she throws it all the way up to a4, doesn't actually threaten a takes b3 because the rook is loose on a8, but perhaps it's about to be time for a rook back to f8 or a queen move to defend the rook. And at some point, a takes b3 will be a problem for white to deal with all this pressure on the a file.
Right, and I really like what Tanya's doing here, because you would say that White has a phenomenal position. Almost all the pieces are on really nice squares, but where is the follow-up? How do you strike in this position? Because Tanya is also trying her best to create some counterplay. She is putting pressure left and right. It's not so clear here for Eric, and she's showing a lot of resistance here, which I really love to see.
Yeah, and it's funny. Queen takes a4 just a moment ago with self-trapped your queen. So I'll show that very quickly on the analysis board that instead of pawn takes d8, queen takes a4, free pawn, yes, bishop to b7. And unfortunately, your queen is trapped. No access along the b file, and it's just under attack, and c6 is defended. So don't just go take pawns when they look free. Eric first takes on d5, and now if c takes d5 over here, that could clear up some space on the diagonal. After queen takes a4, the queen can slide into d7 after bishop to b7. So move order is important, and that's why Tanya takes with the e-pawn. But you called this so long ago, Anna-Maya, right? You're like, oh, come on, let's open up that c file, and now we see the problems in Black's position.
I can sometimes, Robert, I have this strength, I can see the future. It doesn't work in my own game, sadly, but when commentating, things happen much easier.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the thing about commentating is it's okay to be wrong, and then you can just say all sorts of different things, and some of them will land. But no, you were calling this from a long time ago that people like to think, oh, okay, I take on d4. Not now. Your queen's under attack. But oop, my arrow's off. The queen is there. But in general, I'll take on d4. But you were making a point that just because you undouble your pawns doesn't mean that the issues go away. And here it's clear that Eric is in charge in this game. He could take on c5 at any moment, but he's keeping pins in all directions.
Yeah, it's not so clear here for Tanya what to do anymore, because there's now a lot of pressure in her position, and she's not able to start any more counterplay because she tried to push this a pawn all the way to a4, but she's not able to move it anymore. And there's not much going on the king side either. This knight on e5 is a monster. It doesn't allow the queen to go to g6. It doesn't allow a lot of other moves. The rooks are a little bit struggling to move around easily. It will always be a problem for Black, and that is why Tanya is struggling a little bit in this situation.
Right. I mean, you want to play rook f8, you have a semi-open file, and she plays it. But now Eric quickly takes the pawn. It doesn't look great, double pawns, but it's a free pawn. The bishop now has to move, and then c5 can be captured at some point. The reason Eric won't capture immediately is if queen takes on c5, well, now the rook is under attack, but the rook will have to leave the second rank, and then f2 falls. That's not what Eric would want.
Okay, now the knight traded with the bishop. That's a very interesting decision by Eric.
Yeah, because look at this. They're connected pawns. It's a very strange little pawn chain over here. But now all of a sudden, you're mentioning attacking opportunities on the king side. What if this rook joins the party? Where are White's extra pawns? There are two of them, but they're here. They're not good pawns. They're not healthy, and Black can go for the attack.
Right, and since the knight is gone out, it's suddenly so much easier to attack on the king side. So I'm curious to see how Tanya is going to be able to make use of this now the knight is gone. But Eric replies with f4. What a strong pawn chain over there.
Yeah, these pawns are a little bit untouchable for the time being, but this is going to last. These pawns right here. And at some point, if she could get this rook to a5 and this rook to a8, she'd be able to win these pawns on the a file. But that rook on h5 feeling a little bit misplaced.
Indeed, and you would say, I mean, obviously she was hoping for the attack, but now the attack is a little bit gone. You can still try things like queen g4. The queen was pinned now, so you couldn't move it anymore, which is why she played rook d5. She's trying to keep the queens on the board, and in the case of queen takes c6, we might see trade and the d4 pawn falls. And wait a second, it's not that simple.
It's not, but two extra pawns. Do not trade the rooks. You're down material, but now rook e8. I would do that if I were Eric. I get one of the pairs of rooks off the board. Then this king can just walk over to the queen side. And look at this. This is what I didn't want from Eric's perspective. He's very passive here defending, and Tanya's getting her rooks in active stance. It's not going to be easy for Eric to make progress.
Being up 2 pawns, obviously, like in the rook game, should be enough, but ooh, there goes one. Oh no!
Oh my goodness. We're going to have to bring that game up with an instant replay because your reaction was spot on. That was just a terrible blunder, and it was induced by time trouble. But look at this moment here. It was on the verge of being a draw, and then she took with the wrong rook.
That's so unfortunate. She was showing such great resistance in this game, and she was heading to a draw after that capture if she would have captured with the right rook.
Yeah, because this would be a 3-on-2, same side of the board. That is a theoretical draw, not a difficult one. And instead she takes with this rook, I guess not realizing that rooks connect through the enemy rook, and that leaves Eric a rook ahead and a point ahead in this competition. So, a big miss there by Tania.
Unfortunate for Tania, but a great win by Eric. He showed that that the London worked out well this time, but he had a great game. He slipped a little bit here and there. He gave Tania some chances to equalize, but so far he did a great job in the first game.
He did. I couldn't see the mug he was drinking from because yesterday Danny was drinking from all sorts of different mugs. So I was curious.
Really?
Yeah, I was curious who Eric is supporting there. Probably another content creator. But either way, we're in game 2 here. It's Tania on the clock. She's already down almost a minute on Amaya. This could become something we see game after game in this match, as her with a deficit on time.
I think so too, Robert. And this position, it started with the Queen's Gambit position, but it looks already pretty complicated. Black has a lot of pawns pushed on the Queen side, and White is pushing that pawn to d5, and it looks very vulnerable over there, but it seems to be doing just fine.
Right, and actually, now that it's under attack a bunch of times since Black played Bishop e7, breaking the pin. Now the pawn really is hanging. So White may consider move e4 just to expand the center, protect that pawn. You could take on e6. And it's important to note that some people may think, oh, and I'll show this very quickly. Well, Black will take and you take back, and then I take here, and White's pawn structure is bad. Let's not forget about the intermezzo. E takes f7 with check, and only then will I recapture the queen and be up a pawn. So don't forget that pawns can still capture it even if you're down a queen temporarily.
Good point there, Robert. And we see long castle being played. Wow.
Yeah,
That's
not sure
really
how
impressive one.
I don't know how I feel about that. Knight g4 happened. F2 is a loose square. And how do you actually defend this pawn?
I'm guessing you have to consider knight e4, but it looks very loose over there.
Yeah, knight e4 does defend f2. I guess first we have to take on e7. That's clear. The queen will take back. And could you throw in the move d6? Should you play knight e4 first? These aren't easy questions to answer. I think you throw in d6. Like bishop e7, queen 7, d6. And watch out, because it's not out of the question that there is a win of a piece with queen e4 next.
Okay, that makes use of the fact that the pieces are still hanging, and this is why you want to develop your pieces to not have hanging pieces around. But obviously knight g4 is a really good move, as it is directly posing a threat that White needs to take care of. So Tania decides to go bishop e3, which makes a lot of sense. She doesn't mind knight takes e3, losing the pair of bishops, as well. Where will the development be of Black?
Right, and then the rook is staring down the default the queen. I agree with that. So I guess I'm trying to figure out what Eric should do here. Can he just castle? I don't see an immediate threat. This bishop isn't going anywhere, so we can take it next turn. We don't need to rush that choice. Maybe let's get our king out of the center and then ask White, well, what are you going to do? Because we see if knight takes, queen takes, already White has threats with d6 or even pawn to d6. So I think that from Eric's perspective, just leave it status quo as is and get the king out of there.
I think what Eric is worried about is what we mentioned earlier, this d6 queen e4 threat. It's quite a big threat. Oh, he goes c4 now. It's kind of allowing White to go queen e4.
Yeah, and if you then take on e3, like let's say we get eventually knight e3, queen e3, are you happy about your pawn being on c4? That sort of gives access to quite a lot of the board. And queen b4 hitting g7, hitting g4. So I think knight takes e3 is kind of forced now.
Right, and so that's not so pretty vulnerable situation here for Eric. I mean, Tania has a great development so far. I mean, okay, the bishop on f1 is not developed just yet, and the rook on h1 is also not doing much, but the other pieces are pretty well developed, and it's not so clear where Eric is heading other than attacking on the queen side. So he goes e5 now, which forces, I mean, can you take on e5? Okay, I guess you don't want to take because of bishop f6.
But then can we push the pawn to f4? Like, I don't want to, I agree with you. But can I? I'm always curious. Can I just grab it? Because my pawn can reinforce my knight, and a pawn is the pawn.
Right. So perhaps knight takes e5 is a possible move. I'm curious to see what Eric's idea is here. Probably he just wants to start developing here because, well, not many of his pieces are developed, and he would need his pieces to start attacking on the queen side.
Yeah, and I think Tania, to my eyes, she has to take. She does the right thing, though. She calculates. Bishop f6 is played, and the only move is f4 now. There is no other choice. You lose a piece if you play bishop f4, so she plays f4 because knight d7 would have reinforced the attack. And it's a third piece attacking, but look at this. All of a sudden, you're going to get your pawn back perhaps, but I like to move knight e4 here from Tania's perspective. That way she can, and she plays it, she could take this bishop and then have the bishop pair.
Wow, knight e4, she plays it, and her pieces are so active in the center, and it's very unclear when the king is actually heading to the king side, because are you even in time to go short castle now? I guess you are, but there's still so much activity here for white. I would rather I would be scared here with the black pieces.
Same. No, I agree with you because you're now down a pawn. There's a healthy pawn on d5. That's not a target. It's just a pass pawn. And you've committed yourself on the queen side. This pawn chain looks great. We love a good pawn chain, but it also opened up these dark squares. And this knight, if you can take the bishop on f6, gets to go to c6. So I'm imagining that Eric wants to take on e5. He has 3 minor pieces staring at the square. But if you take with either knight, then I get to take your bishop first, take back, have the bishop pair, and I think that Tania's position is getting better.
Right, Tania's position looks amazing, and we see the capture happening on e5.
Mm-hmm. And I don't really see what there is to consider, because if you take on e5, just bishop takes e5, then the queen has to move again, has to retreat, and then black is probably going to get an attack. So knight takes f6 first seems to help white's cause, and she plays it.
She plays it, and there you go. She has a pair of bishops. She has a phenomenal center. And so I'm curious to see what her plan is after capturing on e5 by Eric. Okay, there we go. And what is her plan here?
I think bishop f4 is a blunder because a knight d3 check, a really nasty tactic. So it's easy to overlook that. But the fact is that you're cutting off this rook and the queen from each other. And so, yes, you can take it with the rook, but I'm just going to show that quickly. And all right, this move still keeps the game interesting. But bishop f4, knight d3 check. If you take with the pawn, you lose your queen. You're forced to take here, and then you go down in exchange after pawn takes d3. Still very playable, but black gets material.
That makes a lot of sense. And instead, she goes for queen f4. She's offering a queen trade because obviously the queens are off the board. She has a really nice position, and the pawns in the center will just move forward very quickly. But I have a feeling Eric does not want to trade those queens. And a logical move here would be queen d6, not only stopping the pawn, but obviously also not allowing the queen trade to happen. And he does it, queen d6.
Yes, and do not play bishop to d4 because the same knight d3 check. So whenever there are pieces in line with each other, think about what happens when the piece in between them moves. And normally, if this knight moves, let's say to f3, you lose your queen. But knight d3 will be check. So this queen on f4 needs a defender. I would play the move king to b1, and she plays it because that king probably wants to run away. Now you can play bishop d4, push your pawn to e4. Your pawns are feeling safe and sound in the center.
Wow, it's crazy that this 93 check was in many different ways possible in the position. And that's indeed why king b1 is a very smart and precise move, because now bishop d4, she can do it just fine. And there will be a lot of pressure on this knight on e5, but because of the fact that black is able to defend this very easily, it should be perfectly fine. So f6 is played now, and Tania is going for the development with e4, developing the bishop very soon.
And look at the clock, though. Both players down under a minute. Tania, she has the lead on time. We'll see if this is any indication of what's to come in bullet. But great move by Eric. He wants to push those pawns up the board. And Tania, kings on opposite sides of the board. The black king seems way safer, so Tania will have to worry about her king.
Right, and as the position has progressed now, it's becoming much more clear for Eric to play this position because he doesn't have to deal with a lot of problems anymore. His king is safe, whereas Tania's king is not so safe anymore, as Eric is able to play c3 and able to open up the position of the king even more.
And I love the move rook c1, and I also love the move rook to b8. There's no reason to rush this capture. That will be an umbrella pawn. It will shield the white king, and it will also open up the c file for an eventual queen c5, rook c5. Oh, I don't like b3 on Amaya. It just gives black a free hand to open up more lines.
I don't like it either, Robert. And we see bishop c4. She's trying to create this fortress with the bishop on c4, but it should not be enough. There's so many ways for black to deal with this. And she had a small entrance there, but Eric closed it very quickly.
Probably don't move this queen. That queen's been a great blockading piece. You'd love to push that pawn, but you're not getting away with it. And I could see this game ending in some sort of repetition because Eric is very... Ooh, bishop b5. Do you get d6 check? I guess not yet, but the queen came to e3, and this is so annoying for white to deal with these pawns on the queen side.
I would even want to consider, okay, maybe queen a6 is a bit too much because you allow the d6 check and e5 pawn will be dropping, but this seems like a really nice position for Eric. But Tania is playing really well over here. She's not giving up.
She's not, but I feel like queen f2, there's going to be some big problems for this game. No, why queen trade? Don't trade the queens. And a3, if you can get a3 to work at some point, you can break this pawn chain down.
Both players are in a huge time scramble, which is probably why they traded off the queens. But seems like Tania is able to defend this. And what is happening? Rook f3?
Oh, it blundered a piece. Oh no, his bishop. And Tania grabs it, and she should be able to win this game. e7, bishop a4.
And that's it. Okay, she goes bishop e6, bishop d7, same idea.
c2, just throw the pawn on, and she needs to find king b2. She does. And Eric, you know how tricky he is. Rook takes... Oh, he took the queen.
I would have expected rook takes to a2 as well.
And Eric does not resign. So he is known for coming up with stalemates when they don't seem possible. But I don't see it happening in this game. And Tania fought hard.
That was an incredible game by both players. It was so unclear from the start. Who is attacking? Who is doing better? At first, it looked like Tania had a great position, but then quickly after that, Eric had a great play and had so much more going on the queen side. But wow, what a phenomenal game by both players. What an ending.
That was really hectic. And I mean, really nice fight from both players. It looked like Eric had the upper hand there, and then he traded queens. And what you should know, everybody, is when you're the side attacking, you usually want the queens on the board, because as soon as those queens were traded, now white's king was safe. And then we got an end game where white had that pass pawn on e6. So we get back to game 3 in the London system, Anamaya. And this is, I think at some point, Tania will need to look at this opening, because what Eric did last time with queen c2 95, we really like this for him.
I agree. It's the same position as in the first game. Eric had a fantastic position, and I'm not sure where we will see an improvement here for Tania, because her position is not the greatest, and I can only see Eric actually improving based on the first game he played, because he was, at some point, he had a great advantage, but he was not able to convert it so easily.
No, it was not. And what's going on in this game? She didn't get her pawns pinned. She's on c4 and e4, but this is the problem when you have all these pawns on light squares. This is, I don't even know what to call this structure. Do you have a name for this? The X?
Looks like an X to me. Yeah. I think we call it the X, the cross.
Yeah. So okay, wait, that's the X. Here's the Q, and there's the C, the bishop on c8. So that's the XQC right here. So just so you know, we're all aware, here we go, the XQC. But this is not what you want from black side of things here, because your bishop is entombed by its own pawns.
Yes, the XQC, you heard it here first.
Oh gosh, well, this is not going to be nice for Tania. Look at this piece, Anima. You play the French defense. This is worse than any bishop you've ever had in the French.
Okay, as a French player, I still have faith in that bishop. You just watch it go towards e4, and you know, just wait for it.
So you're saying bishop e8, bishop d7, bishop e8, bishop g6, bishop e4?
Yep, that seems like a wonderful maneuver of the bishop. Very common one too in these type of structures.
How long do you think I'm going to be commentating for? Like, 3 years before that bishop gets there? Come on. This knight is going right back to e5. You're never going to get your bishop around there. This rook is coming to f1. This queen might go to a4. This is strategically perhaps already lost for black.
Tanya will not disappoint me. I can tell you that. At least not with the bishop.
Oh gosh, this is a really, really bad piece. And I mean, another move that white can play right now is b3. It undoubles the pawns, but after c takes, a takes, white improves the pawn structure, capturing towards the center, opens this rook on the a file, and instead he brings the rook over the f file because why not? Go bishop e8. Where to next?
Yeah, I think bishop e8 for the time being is just fine. And I think Taya should be considering the move c5. I mean, making sure that you get rid of this problem, the double pawns on the c file. And obviously that will not help that much, but it is a small improvement and we could use those small improvements for this position.
I'm agreeing with you. I can't believe I'm agreeing about this bishop, but the thing is c5, it eliminates one of black's big problems. The bishop is tied down to this pawn. So after c5, even though cd, ed, that's not going to be great for your pawn e6, at least your bishop has some room to roam now on this diagonal all the way to a4 or going to h5. Not really much from there, but at least there's a sign of life for the piece.
And now we see queen f2. So Eric is keeping an eye on that f8 square. So if the queen leaves from there, the queen on e7, then it will be a checkmate in 1. So gotta keep in mind that that is a threat as long as the bishop is on e8 and it's covering the rook on the 8th rank. Mm-hmm. So what would be black's idea here? Perhaps, I mean, you would want to play bishop g6 at some point. I was going to suggest maybe you want to throw in a move like h6, but it weakens the g6 square and you'll not likely get very easily access to g6 anymore.
Yeah, you raise a good point that bishop g6, it doubles and isolates black's pawns after the capture, but at least you're not saddled with that bad bishop. And those pawns, maybe not the end of the world. And she goes for it. And I guess you know what's the problem, Anamaya? Now after d takes c5, the queen is dragged away. So then there's going to be a problem with knight takes g6, make queen f7, things like that. And this king is going to be in trouble.
Ooh, that looks indeed very dangerous. She's trying to develop the bishop, go to e4, as we mentioned before. But after knight takes g6, which seems like a logical move, right? Because the bishop is activating now. And that's what he's going for. He's trading off this knight for the bishop. And at first you might be like, okay, this looks very logical, very sensible. I mean, this bishop was going to become a strong piece. But now with the knight off the board, it's not that clear anymore for white. And black could be having drawing chances again.
Yes, and later in the game, the open b file could be good for black. Not now, don't blunder your rook over there. Also the pawn g6 under attack. But if we just go back a moment, I just want to show this on the board. So bishop g6 was played, perfectly reasonable move. And the problem was d takes c5. It looks wrong because you lose the defense of your knight. It looks like it can just be captured. If the rook comes to c8 to take with the rook, the pawn goes up to c6, defended by the knight. That's bad. If queen takes c5, then there's knight g6, pawn takes, and as mentioned, queen f7 check, and the e pawn falls, which also defends e3, and then this rook will come up for a checkmating attack. So that was what white had, is a one move thing. And after the trade, g5, queen into e5. Okay, I think that black is really fighting here.
Black is doing fine. It's still worrying me a bit for black that the pawns on the g file are like doubled and they're not that great. The pawn g5 is a huge weakness. Black does not have the greatest pawn structure, but it's still holdable. You can still try to make something happen. As you mentioned, the pawn b2 is a big weakness of white as well. So black has definitely something to play for.
Right, and white might play rook f3, rook g3, and just try to win that pawn directly. So the g5 pawn does stick out like a sore thumb, but just because you win one pawn doesn't mean that the game ends. If black is able to get this rook somehow to b8, don't do it now, it hangs it. We've already mentioned that is a problem. So can we maneuver our rook somehow, maybe like rook d8, and then rook d6, rook b6? It takes a while, but it looks like it's okay.
Yeah, it takes a long time, but what else do you have here? It's not so clear. You can't just trade off the rooks because once the rooks are off the board, it's pretty clear that white has the upper hand here. With the queen on e5, it looks so much more active, so much more powerful. And Eric is denying the rook trick. Really interesting decision.
Yes, and king f7. See, that is a brave move. And it just so happens that it's a pretty good move because if the rooks get traded, I guess Tania's saying all of my pawns are protected. A7 defended by the queen, E6 defended, G5 all protected by that one queen on E7. So rook F1, she can just go right back to G8. I would not go up to G6. That looks really bad. So yeah, going back and forth, and maybe Tania found a way to hold everything together.
Looks like it. There's still some problems you need to deal with, and Eric is obviously not taking that repetition and trying to go for the attack. He plays rook e3, probably with the idea to play rook g3 and put pressure on the pawn on g5. So let's see what Tania has in mind. She is defending the e6 pawn even more, so the king can move around easily. But yeah, what do you do after rook g3? And she's giving up the g5 pawn.
Yeah, the g5 pawn, that's falling, and that's a problem because it's not just a pawn. Now there's an attack. So if you could trade queens, not, of course, right now because your pawn is pinned on g7, you can't take back. But if you could somehow trade queens, then Black has some serious chances because of this pawn on b2.
Yeah, and we see that the times are getting closer together. So we see that Tania has 1 minute on the clock. Eric has 1 minute 40. It's not a big difference, but because of the current position, it's safe to say that Tania has not the greatest position. And yeah, she's also spending quite some time on, because obviously it's not so simple what to do here. Her pawn structure is very weak, and she has very little counterplay as well as compensation for the pawn.
And Eric has a full minute lead on the clock. And okay, offering the queen trade, that makes a lot of sense. Where is White's extra pawn? It's right here on h3. We love extra pawns, but if they can't mobilize, then is the presence really felt? And perhaps there's a take, and then after rook takes rook f3, and then this rook doesn't get to where it wants to be, which is over on the b file.
Right, and yeah, it will benefit Eric a lot to trade off those queens. Even if you keep the queens on the board, I mean, obviously this the white queen is super active, but it's safe to simplify over here. There's not much that white has to worry about. The b2 and a2 pawn might become vulnerable, but white has so much play here that there's very little chance that black can make use of this, and that's why we see rook f3 happen now.
Yeah, it was a great decision by Eric. And this rook, right? It needs to be on the b file. It has nowhere to go. You can't move the king and the rook. You have to play somehow rook h8, king h7, just to even think about bringing your rook to the queen side. So this rook is just caught off guard. And g4 now? Okay, this is just, yeah,
Ooh,
very direct.
That is not looking good for black.
No, it's done. It's broken.
Yeah, e5. I mean, she's trying to make something happen here. She's trying to trade some pawns because the more pawns are off the board, the more chances you have for a draw. But obviously, since her pawn structure is not the greatest, it's frankly quite bad. It will be very difficult to hold this position.
Now it's not possible. If you trade rooks, you're down a pawn in the endgame, just losing. Now you're down 2 pawns in the rook endgame. So this is completely lost for black, and your pawns are also bad. So rook d5 right now might just win another pawn if he wants it.
Yeah, so Eric is cutting off the king, so making sure it doesn't come towards where the action is on the queen side. And we see a resignation, 2-1 lead for Eric.
Yes, that was a hard-fought game, and he was able to pick up that g5 pawn and win the game. So he is controlled, and that's why I don't like that how the opening is going for Tania and the black side in London, because it feels like every game Eric is the one dictating the entire course of the action, and she's just responding to his ideas. Doesn't really have the foundation that she would like.
I agree. And I'm really curious to see if she's going to switch it up, perhaps playing a complete different opening against his London. Maybe even switch it up on move 1. But for now, we see, I believe this is a very similar position to what we've seen in the second game.
And so in that game, Tania quickly grabbed that pawn back on c4. Here, Eric gets in b5, which looks bad because the knight can take it, but then this e4 pawn would drop. So you throw in the move e5. That's how the theory goes. This knight now gets a home on d5. You do, in fact, win this pawn on b5, but it's a very messy situation. So Tania, she plays in the spirit of the Vienna, bishop to g5, pinning this knight, e5 saved up for later, perhaps, and now the pawn on b5 really can be captured without any problem.
This opening looks very complicated. I think this will favor Tanya much more than Eric because Eric loves to play those solid kind of openings like the London system. And I think the more complicated it becomes, the more Tanya will feel comfortable, as we've seen in the second game as well. So I'm curious to see how things will develop here. We see a6 being played. It's a very typical move because you want to play bishop b7. You want to, I mean, obviously defend the whole pawn chain on the queen side. And it looks much more natural to play it with a6.
And that's right. And e5 looks to win a piece, but as is typical in the French, you have h6 after e5. So you hit the bishop keeps the pin, and then black plays g5. So not just the French, but the Moran and some of these like Botvinnik Slavs and all that stuff have these ideas. And so here comes the bishop back to h4, and Eric will play g5 afterwards, and then the knight will sacrifice because you're going to get it back on f6. Very complicated position.
Very much so. And yeah. It looks like we're heading towards, I'm curious to see if we'll actually go to this line. It looks like it. It's a very theoretical line. And it looks like both players, I mean, Tanya is spending quite some time, so I'm not sure if she's very much familiar with this or she's just taking her time, making sure that she's not, you know, messing the lines up as much.
But she's calculating. You can see it. She's really trying to play objectively strong chess. She's not just trying to play quickly, and you have to appreciate that as a chess player, but you also have to worry about it as a commentator looking at Blitz games. She is now down over a minute and now a half on the clock. So knight takes g5. She has to go for it, and she sees it instantly, right? Like we know how strong Tanya is. It just feels like she isn't quite trusting herself, and she's not playing with her instinct. She's thinking and thinking and thinking, and it's costing her on the clock.
Looks like it, and we see the sacrifice actually happen on the board now. It's not a very big sacrifice because at the same time the knight on f6 is hanging right now, so Tanya will be able to recapture the piece very soon. But this is a very interesting position because on one hand you would want to take the white side because you have so much space, you have queen f3 at your disposal, there's a lot happening, but where is your attack? It's not that clear.
And I think that Eric has to play knight to d7, bishop to b7, just play in the style of these positions that you get after these sacrifices, because bishop e7, as you're pointing out, there could be like a take on f6 and then a queen f3 with hitting the rook and hitting the bishop on f6. So you probably have to play knight d7 rather than bishop e7 breaking the pin.
Right, so now Eric is spending some time here. Okay, there he goes. He plays knight b to d7. He's allowing the move queen f3, which looks very natural and straightforward. It looks like we might see this happen. Oh, she decides to take on f6 instead, directly.
And Eric quickly says, no queen f3 for you. And maybe bishop e2 is also harder to play, right? This bishop would love to come out to the f3 square and challenge for the diagonal. But if you move the bishop to e2, you do drop this pawn on g2 over here, which is not the end of the world, because what this game comes down to, instead of just a single pawn, whose king is going to be safer? They're both in the center, and d5 saying, you're king, I'm about to open that thing and go for an attack.
That's a really nice addition from Tanya. And yeah, it goes to show how this king is so vulnerable in the center. I mean, obviously, going short castle here with the black pieces is not ideal, but going long castle, I don't see that happen anytime soon. And you probably would want to go long castle at this point. But knight c5 is a really strong move because after d takes c6, you can simply capture with the knight. And this knight is holding down black's position really well.
Yeah, that's a beastly knight on e6, hitting the bishop on g5, protecting the c7 square, and it's just a perfect location for it. So when the knight was on d7, that pawn 3 squares away was dominating it. Now the knight comes out into the open. If you take on e6, the bishop on b7 is happy to see the diagonal again. So I'm liking how this game is trending for Eric, even if the eval is saying, yeah, it's perfectly fine for white.
This looks like fine for black too. And yeah, we see the queen trade happen, and I feel like black is doing more than just fine because the pawn on f6 is very vulnerable of white. The development of black is really good, and white's development, I mean, obviously you can play, actually I wanted to play bishop e2, but obviously the pawn on g2 will drop, so that might happen a little bit later after the pawn will get some more coverage on g2.
That's right. And h3 played. That move was not loved, and it's probably because she could have put h4 instead, because that pawn can just rush up the board. That's a pass pawn. That's not just a pawn that needs to be defended. So I think h3 was just a little too quiet, and now Eric successfully castles queenside. White is up a pawn, but has no development. I mean, black just has every piece on a perfect square, and so Tania trying to break down this pawn chain here on the queen side.
A4 is a very typical move to play in such position with this pawn structure, but in this position it's really hard to say what it actually does, because it actually helps black a lot, because well, the pawns on the queen side are very active anyways. They can play b4 any moment, and it doesn't do much damage to black's position.
And interestingly, Eric didn't take the pawn that was hanging on g2, right? He could have taken that pawn, brought his bishop right back to c6 to keep this pawn defended. Instead, he plays bishop to e5, which is a perfectly good move. You mentioned how f6 is just kind of a sitting duck waiting to be captured, and now b4 has even more force with b2 hanging at the end.
Right, and b4 is really a move you should be worried about here with the white pieces. Obviously now bishop f3, it's pretty much forcing the trade. So I'm expecting bishop takes f3, and then perhaps b4 would be really worrying here for white.
These are pass pawns. I mean, they're in front of the black king, but there are no queens on the board, so keep running with those pawns. b4 looks like a good start. If that knight has to go over to a4, knights in the rim are particularly dim in this position, and then you can always just take on f6 if you need.
Right, and b4 has been played. Now, where does the knight go? Obviously, as you mentioned, knight on e4. You defend the b2 pawn, but the knight is not doing anything else, and it looks very vulnerable over there too. So there's very little play here for white, and yeah, it's very simple here to play here with the black pieces.
One idea is just bringing that king up to b5. That knight's trapped. Like, that knight cannot move. So maybe you should go through c6 instead of a6, but either way, you can get to this b5 square, and this knight can't move. You bring a rook to a8, and you might just win the piece.
Right. Yeah. I think Tania will go for knight c5 sooner or later, but as long as the knight is doing fine on a4, we don't need to move that knight, obviously.
She needs to play rook g4, like now, because this pawn needs to go. You need to attack it. So rook g1, I understand you're giving up h3, but if c4 falls, then white has a really good chance of surviving this game.
That would be really nice for Tania, and she's down to 23 seconds, so she has very little time left, whereas Eric is in quite a comfortable spot with 1.5 minutes on the clock. And he plays rook e8, which makes a lot of sense because now there's a pin on the e file, and that's why Tania moved the king to f1.
But if your last move was king to e2, and then you have to retreat to f1, you know you're not happy about what just happened. I'm still looking for this out of my, like, rook g1, rook g4. I need to get the c4 pawn. Otherwise, you have no moves.
Yeah, Robert, it's not so clear. She goes for f4 instead. It's a similar idea.
I like it a lot. No, that's really well done by her, because the knight does have the c5 square after rook a8, but okay, then the f4 pawn falls. So this is working out pretty decently for Eric.
Yeah, and after takes, you can take the pawn b4, but the pawn on b2 also hangs. So there's a lot of pawns hanging in a position, and this looks like it's going to work out for black more than for white. Although
you got to give credit to Tania, I thought that she was just going to lose in a few moves, and look at that. Eva Bar says, "Oh, bishop b2, this rook b1."
What a beautiful move!
Oh, because you would think you'd go rook c2 to stay in front of the passed pawn, but no, rook b1 says your king is misplaced. And look at the eval bar, and look whose pawn structure is better. It's even on the bar, and white's pawn structure is better because black has these double pawns.
Wow, Robert, Tania is coming back from the worst.
She's proving herself to be quite a capable bullet player. Bishop c5, okay, defending the pawn makes perfect sense. Nice move.
Bishop e3, I like that a lot.
The rook probably should stay on the... Yeah, now rook c2. Everything she's doing is perfect. She's up on time.
Wow. And this is a very exciting situation because she has a very solid position now. She's doing just fine. White has a pass pawn on the h file. Black has a pass pawn on the c file. Which pawn will be more dangerous for the other side? I have a feeling this h pawn might become really dangerous. But now with the rook on c1 instead, it could be interesting.
Yes, bishop back to e3. No checks for you, Eric. Trying to line up some checks. Okay, I see what he's doing. Rook h5 now. Uh-oh, he's starting to win a pawn.
Ooh, and you cannot defend it anymore because the rook was cutting off the king.
And if you're Tanya, I don't think you even trade bishop. Just go back. Okay, she does.
She does.
I don't love that choice, but the thing is, these pawns are very close to white's king, so this should be a hold for her. And I mean, if she's able to hold this, what a job she has done in this game.
She came back from such a terrible position. Eric had such a great start in that opening, and this goes to show how Tania is able to show resistance throughout her games. If only she could get started with the edge, Robert.
Yeah, no, this game did not go her way at all. And Eric is trying to pressure on the clock. She is down under 8 seconds, but she's moving fast enough. Like, she's gaining a little bit of time thanks to the increment. So I think she's handling this very nicely. But Eric is going to slowly push some pawns. He's not going to allow a draw too easily.
He's not in a rush, and I think the more time goes down off the match clock, the more he'll be happy as well about this.
Whoa, and apparently, oh my gosh!
Wait a second!
Oh, okay. I was trying to figure out like why the eval bar swung so much before that. So I'm going to pull up that game real quick. That was just a sad end to that game, and what a defense she was showing. But right here, this might be an instructive end game, because a few moves earlier, right here, it says that rook d7 was a bad move, that black suddenly is winning. And the reason why is it just wants to go with this king and win this pawn, and it's claiming that the rook is in a perfect place to help you win this game. Like, you can try to get this pawn, but after all this happens, you can just play rook a5, and the next move will be king takes f2, and there's nothing white can do to attack this pawn.
Wow, what an instructive endgame, but unfortunately the game ended really quickly after that. I was so starstruck by the evil bar dropping in this situation that I didn't even realize the rook was hanging a move later.
Yeah, no, and that was a huge blunder, but in the words of Eric Rosen's cup, treat every blunder as a gambit. So that was a gambit. It might have also cost a full point in the match. That's pretty close, but yeah, let's go. Nice merch there, Eric.
Nice. Love this lead ad. And I love that he's calling a blunder a gambit, as he is also famous for his many gambits. Do you think we're going to see any gambits from Eric today?
I think we're just going to keep seeing this London system. It's working game after game. So why gambit anything when you're just getting a dominant knight against a very poorly placed bishop?
Right, it looks like in this match, he's going for the more solid approach. However, in the last game, it was much more complicated, and he did also do a great job there. So we might see a gambit at some point in this match.
Yeah, and well, look at this. So Tania, she changed her opening a little bit. She took on f4 in this game and then took on c6. So there's a difference. This pawn was under attack. Eric spends a move protecting it, but just I have the sense that Eric is far more comfortable. Look at the clock again, Anamaya. It's an extra minute and nearly a minute and a half for Eric.
Right, Robert. You're right up as Eric's alley in this position. He knows all the ins and outs of the London, so I'm not surprised about this time difference. But I'm hoping to see Tania maybe switching them up later on, so we could see the time being much closer at the start of the games.
Yeah, I think maybe she needs a new response altogether, and she keeps getting into this position where at some point she might have to play f5 to reinforce the knight on e4, and then the knight gets the e5 square. So after rook e1, I think this time she might bring her knight back to d6.
Looks very logical, and the knight on d6 is not a bad place. Obviously, you want to keep it on e4, but a knight on d6 is controlling many squares as well, so that would make a lot of sense. And once again, if you play f5 in this position, you allow the knight to jump to e5, so you don't want to just allow that to happen.
Right, that pawn on f6 is very important. Continuing to protect the knight on e4 was not worth it. So as we look at this position, Anamaya, you called in the first game how the c6 pawn, even though the pawns are undoubled, the c file is under white's control, and that can be a problem for black. So what ideas can we come up with? For white, I'm just thinking queen c2, just hitting this pawn, then playing a rook to c1. It feels like white's moves come pretty naturally. So how is black going to deal with this?
It's not so simple over here. You would want to try to start attacking on the few things you have in a position. And one of the things I'm thinking about is putting pressure on the pawn on b2. You have the half open b file with the black pieces. So if you can start doubling up the rooks on the b file, that is something you can try to do. And once Eric plays b3, you can consider pushing a5, a4, and putting pressure on that pawn over there. So that's something that you could think of with the black pieces. Another thing is you would want to play either c5 or e5, but that's not going to happen so easily. But if black is able to do that, black will have a very nice position.
I like what you were saying, though, about going after the b2 pawn. So I would even consider starting with a5 and maybe even a4. That way I don't have to commit my rook to b8 too early. And I like that a lot. I think that you want to play rook f to b8 and push that pawn, as you were mentioning. But if you move this rook away, I'm already starting to worry about this king over here, because queen c2 is what I think white should not pre-move, because you shouldn't be pre-moving with so much time on the clock, but pre-move the idea. I don't really know how black should meet this, because if you ever play h6, all your light squares are vulnerable. And if you ever play f5, you're allowing the knight back to e5. So queen c2 is just a huge nuisance.
This goes to show how important it is that you're not pushing your pawns too much, because if you push the pawn, for example, as you mentioned, to a6, h6, the square next to it becomes very weak, and that's why you gotta be really careful with your pawns. And it's in this position, this pawn structure that Tania has, that every single pawn push is weakening one square, and that is gonna be very crucial in this game.
And you mentioned the idea of c5 to open up the position. So rook c8 followed by c5 looks like it's about to happen, but queen c2 is such an important tempo. You have to deal with the h7 pawn, then rook c1, and you don't get c5. So I don't really like this move. I think it makes black's plan clearer, and now Tania should go with the Anamaya approach, a5, a4.
Yeah, it's surprising to see that Eric is going for b3 right away. There was no need to do it voluntarily, as there was no clear attack on b2 just yet. But perhaps he was seeing the rook b8 move coming up very soon, so he simply prepared for this. But as you mentioned, a5, a4 is coming up very quickly, and I'm curious to see if Tania is going to play it.
And it kind of saves Tania a move, because you don't need to put a rook on b8 if your opponent already does your job for you. And she plays g6, so clear she didn't want to play h6. And we've been talking about this for a while. If white had played queen to c2, what are you going to do? Play f5, in comes the knight to e5. That looks bad. If you play h6, I don't know. There's like a check and a knight h4. Things like that look scary, even if it doesn't quite work now. You'll always have to be on the lookout for it. So that's why Tania decides, now the queen's not on c2 yet, I can get away with g6, because, okay, here comes Eric with h4, but maybe it's not quick enough. And there is the possibility that she gets in that c5 move.
She does it. She plays rook a c8, preparing the c5 move. And what is Eric able to do against it? You can't just stop it. And looks like she will be able to play c5.
And if you play h5, going after this pawn, I think black could take it. So it goes queen c5. Now it's going to transition into an endgame. I don't really know if black has a choice, because this knight on d6 is under attack. So if queen takes, pawn takes, later I could see us playing for e5. So drop the knight to f7, play rook e8, go for e5. And I feel like the endgame isn't so bad for black at all.
I agree with you, Robert, because you would say that, okay, white has a lot of pawns on the queen side, could potentially create a passed pawn over there. But with black having such a strong center, this might change the game a lot. And with the move e5 coming up in a few moves, perhaps, this might turn things around.
Yeah, if you get e5 in, then black should be very happy. But Eric, he hears what we're talking about, even though, of course, he doesn't have the stream on. He says, nope, no e5. How many pieces does he have covering the square? 1, 2, can't even count them in time. You have 4 pieces, and black only has 3. So you can't play e5 for the time being. But maybe you can go to the other side of the board. a5, a4. We shouldn't necessarily forget about that idea.
Right, there's many ways for black to put pressure in this position now. With the pawn on c5 as well, like, it's not right now, you can't really attack it right now, but this could potentially become a weakness as the position will develop and you will get your pawn to a5, so b4 will be out of the question. So there's definitely a lot of things that Tania could be playing for here. You could potentially even consider moving the knight to b7 if you really want to attack the pawn on c5.
And you're absolutely right. I'm just wondering if she has time to do it, both over the board and on the clock. 33 seconds for Tania. So game after game, we're concerned about her time situation. However, in the last game, which she did lose, she had 15 seconds to a minute and a half. And then at some point she was up on time.
Yeah, Eric's time management is really great for him because, well, he's up on the clock almost every single game, and only in positions where he's struggling a little bit, he's not doing well so much, he's lower on the clock, but very rarely. So that goes to show how good his time management is.
And Tania quickly plays rook d8. She could have put e4 to give herself a protected pass pawn. Likely did not want to commit. She doesn't really have time to calculate for too long. So she just says, I will trade everything if you take on e5. And that endgame shouldn't be so bad for black. Now, the one bad thing I would say is this outside pass pawn potential. But now she goes e4. So she protects the pawn, plays e4. But I'm starting to be a little bit concerned about what you've been talking about, Anamaya, with the outside pass pawn on the queen side.
The bishop goes to a6 now, and it looks like it's an odd square for the bishop, but it is super dangerous here, as indeed Eric will be preparing a4, b5, and his bishop on a6 will become very strong, supporting the pawns on the queen side, try to promote one of the pawns. And Tania has to come up with an idea now. She goes knight f5, trading off the knights.
Mm-hmm. And she really wants to get d4 in, but it's hard to see how that happens. The king can't go to e5. There's a pawn here, and here comes white's pawn.
Wow, rook d4 stopping the pawn on d5.
c6.
Oh, she lost the pawn on d5, which was a very important pawn for her.
No, now it's completely lost. I mean, white has 2 extra pawns, could be 3 after c6, and it turned in a hurry.
That was a really well done game by Tania, but Eric is just doing so much better. He makes it look so easy from his perspective. He's playing super solid, super like he plays the right moves whenever needed, and his time management is on point. And I think that's what Tania is hurting as well, because she's so low on the clock. The blunders, the small problems become big problems later on in the game.
Right. And now it's a 4-1 lead, so a 3-point advantage for Eric. And Tania, she is playing pretty well, but the clock is just her worst enemy at this stage. And now we have a totally different setup. She's not allowing any kind of d takes c4s, as we've seen in previous games. She took on d5, and now we'll see how this one goes from here. But Eric, he takes a sip. He should be feeling pretty happy right now.
Yeah, Eric has a 4-1 lead. Remember, we had the prediction saying that it's going to be, I believe it was a 4-4 score for the 5+1 portion of the match. So he already fulfilled the score of 4 points, and it looks like he is doing a great job so far in the match. So Tania really needs to step up, and I'm curious to see if she will be able to do that in this game now that the opening has changed a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And it's just a solid approach, right? We're looking at this position. Black has this pawn chain towards d5. White has this pawn chain towards d4. If we cut the board in half, white has an extra pawn on the e file, so on the king side, and black has an extra pawn on the c file and the queen side. So that's how these games often go. And we could see potentially, there it is, a pawn minority attack. And Eric says, nope, not for you this game.
Right. And a5 is a very typical move. Rook b1, trying to prepare that b4 move anyways, and Eric stops it with queen e7.
Mm-hmm. Queen e7, just making sure that b4 is not happening. Also giving more control over e4. That's where a pawn break could potentially happen, and rook e1 may be indicating that at some point e4 is on the table because the knight f6 is pinned.
Right, and you would say that you would not want to push e4 with the white pieces because this weakens the pawn on d4 a lot. But in this situation, you want to open up the position more because you're the one that has so much space and you want to make use of that. So if you play e4, you might be worried about d takes e4, and the pawn on d4 will be very vulnerable. But yeah, it allows white a lot of things. First of all, the pressure on the e file, the pin on the diagonal of the bishop on g5, which is why Eric goes for bishop e4. Wow.
Yeah, he just plants the bishop on the square and saying, I don't even need to calculate these tactics. I don't have to worry about the position opening up. And after bishop e4, d takes e4, this knight comes to d2. It attacks the pawn. It can go to c4. But look at that move by Eric, a quick h6. If you take, the knight takes. Now there's no longer pin, and I have e4 well defended. So do you retreat? I think you might need to be worried about g5, bishop g3, and do you want these double pawns over here? Not the end of the world, but sometimes it's hard to swallow the idea of double pawns in a position.
I would say it's not too bad to have the double pawns as you have the weakness on e4 at least. But obviously, if you had the choice to not go for it, you would not want to go for it. And that's why she goes for bishop f4. If you have the double pawns on the f file after bishop takes f4, pawn takes f4, at least you open up the e file for the rook. So you will put more pressure on the pawn on e4.
Really clever move because you can't defend that pawn e4. So queen d6 attacks two pawns at once, and that way you're going to lose e4, but at least you gain one of the others. But that was a very interesting idea there by Tania, just to go directly after the pawn.
Yeah, very smart play by Tania. And now you can take on f4, you will recapture the pawn. And it's very interesting that, well, we're not into an endgame yet, but it's not so clear who is better here because both sides are playing for something here. And the weaknesses, I mean, the only weakness I see in the position is the pawn d4, but it's not the worst for white, obviously.
Right. And for now, it does control this knight on d7, and no forward jumps for it. At some point, you can consider d5, as is often the case when you have an IQP. But right now, you have to deal with all of this tension on the e4 square. So if I'm Tania, I'm making a move like queen d3, just connecting my rooks, protecting this knight on e4. I don't really want to take your knight on f6, because if you can take back with your knight, play a move like rook to d8, then this d4 pawn becomes a quick target.
Right, and that's what you should be concerned about. But for now, queen d3 looks like a really nice move. She's spending her time here, but okay, she goes queen c2, also a very logical move here. And she would probably want to make use of the rooks more. So probably we will see rook e3. We will have to see if she wants to double up on the e file or if she prefers to play rook to d1. Because playing b4 in this position, it might not be so great anymore.
That's entirely true. And I think sometimes we as chess players forget about that. We had this idea earlier. We still want to execute it, but playing for b4, nah, this is not the position for it. So she takes on e4 with knight. You raise the question, does she want rook d1? Does she want rook e3? I don't have the answer, so I will let her answer it for us. And for Eric, right, what do you do with this knight? That's the kind of the problem piece in the position. It doesn't really have anywhere to go. You can go knight over here to f6, but after knight f6, we might just see some trades, and it looks like we're not having too much material remaining, and it feels like a level position.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, with queen c5, I feel like Tania could be the one putting more pressure in this position because it looks more like she can have the upper hand in the position. Funnily enough, with the weak pawn on d4, but with the black pawn structure on the queen side, I feel like white could have a lot of chances here, putting the queen on b6, threatening to take on b7. There's a lot of weaknesses on this side for black.
Yeah, it's funny how one pawn move, hurts the position, and rook d1 after rook d5. I don't think queen b6 works anymore because of rook b5, but maybe after rook d5, queen e7 will be played, offering a queen trade so you can land a rook on the 7th rank, and that's why Eric decided to park his rook on d7.
Looks very logical, and this position looks very balanced, so we're not going anywhere just yet, but yeah, I'm curious to see how the position develops. Will we see more action? Will we see d5 in the position, or will both players just remain calm and not do anything too crazy? Because the more you risk, obviously you might have the chance to lose even. So we will see like who is going to strike first.
I kind of like the move rook e5 from Tania's perspective. It just stops rook d5, and maybe you can double on the e file at some moment. I like the idea of a rook lift just to see how black is going to react. I just don't like that Tania has 1 minute on her clock. I mean, the position may be all zeros with 8 different moves, but if you don't move at all, you're going to find yourself in a time crunch and not be able to find those accurate choices.
Yeah, Tania really needs to speed up here. As you said, like the time management is hurting her a lot because she is playing some good chess. But when you have very little time left, it is difficult to make the right moves, make the right choices, and it's very easy to blunder. So she decides to play b4, which is a little bit surprising, but it looks like she wants to make progress in the positions. She wants to open up some more files, and she does it by playing b4.
Yeah, at least she can keep her eyes on a clear target. D4 is one that black wants to go after, so rook 8 at D8 looks to take care of that, and then this rook will probably slide up to E4 to keep that pawn as defended as possible. And if black ever goes for that pawn, then B7 will drop. So it still feels like a level position. I love the move Queen D6. I think white's best piece was the queen, and if we get a trade, then A3 is a target, D4 is a target, and because black's pawns are compact, I think that he has better chances.
I agree with you there, Robert. And yeah, we see the queen trade happen on the board, and Tania replies with rook e7. She is activating her rook. It will not be so easy for her to stack on the 7th rank as much, because we see the pawn on a3 drop.
Okay, but she's clearly going for the 7th rank. Although, what if black just drops the rook passively? You don't really want to defend in this manner, but you are up a pawn. You can defend actively with your rook coming to f6. So I'm worried about Tania here. She gave up a pawn, didn't feel necessary.
I agree. And while we are in this rook endgame once again, we got a raid from Chessbra. Welcome, everyone. I hope you guys are doing fantastic. We are in the match between Tania and Eric Rosen, and we're again in a rook endgame, Robert, as before.
Yeah, although it's a rook endgame with one extra pawn, and it can be two, because as soon as h4 happens, you give up the pawn. The g3 pawn is pinned. So that's an unfortunate blunder caused by time trouble. And that has been the entire storyline thus far. It's not like this has been a one-sided matchup over the board. It's been well played by Eric, to be sure. But Tania, even when she has chances, she doesn't have the clock to back it up.
Right. And yeah, this is hurting Tania's chances a lot. And I'm curious to see how this will develop in the later different time controls. Will she be able to level it up, the time situation, even better in the upcoming time controls, or will it be more difficult for her? You would say that it will be more difficult for her, but sometimes when the times are much closer starting off, you are kind of forced to play quickly if you have less time. So maybe we will see some differences later on.
No, it's very true. And when you have 5 minutes to start, you think you have forever. Oh, look at this. If rook takes c4, b2. So the rook takes c4 is not even a threat because of the move b2, which is awesome. It just goes to show when pieces are overloaded, and this rook on b4 will be overloaded. So rook c2 played instead, going after the f2 pawn. Wait, but then b3 drops.
I guess you take and rook b6, you stand behind the pawn.
That looks
but
better.
It's not that simple.
Yeah, no, but that's definitely the right way to go, because then the white rook will have to go to c1 and then b1, and it's a passive rook. Eric doesn't need to be asked twice. He finds it, and this king, just check. And then eventually this king for black will get in.
Yeah, and the pawn is so far away from the king side. Once the king will go to all the way to c4, the rook or maybe the king will be able to snatch the pawns on the king side. And we see that Tania runs out of time, but it was already a lost position. So 5-1 for Eric Rosen.
Yeah, Eric is really playing well there. And for Tania, I think right now she needs to stop playing what she has been from the black side. She needs a new opening. It's difficult without getting a break, without analyzing things. But I mean, this has not been working out for her.
She's doing the same opening again, the same line against the London system. Let's see if she decides to switch something up again. But it looks like we're just heading to the same line in this opening.
We'll see if she plays something different than f6. Oh, nope. Okay, we won't see, because it's the same thing. And again, it's the problem when you don't have, time to step aside, analyze variations. You go for the same path, and she has changed it. In this game, she went queen takes c6. Last time she tried b takes c6. But what the issue is here, Anamaya, and we've all done this as chess players, is we're like, okay, I've studied my openings before. I know it's fine. Let me just change that one move. When in reality, maybe she just needs to change her whole opening altogether because these types of positions are far too comfortable for Eric, and it doesn't feel like they're Tania's style.
I agree. And it's so difficult to make that step to like change it up because you're so loyal to your openings. You feel like you're comfortable with how things are going. But I have a feeling that Eric did prepare for this match and really saw that this line would be working out. So obviously he sticks to this. But for Tania, it is difficult in general to switch things up. But it's so important in these kind of matches to switch it up because you could have gotten like a big preparation against you and you got to be ready for that.
Exactly. And what we're about to see is bishop takes, pawn takes, knight d2. And once again, we're going to see a knight finding some dark square against a bishop without a good diagonal. So I just do not like the way this match has been going for Tania. And yeah, we're seeing this. Look, watch knight d2, f5, f3. And that knight is going, let me guess, where's that knight going out of my, can you let everybody know where that knight is going to go?
We wanted to put on e5, but we're not able to get there just yet, which is why Eric plays f3 to remove the pawn on e4. So the knight will go to e5 eventually, Robert.
Yeah, and it just, going to be a frustrating one here for Tania because she believes in the opening. And, just a small inaccuracy, it seems like, what did I do wrong? I played a normal move, but she's getting herself into trouble every single game and she's not finding any sort of comfort zone. E6 is a backward pawn to target. The E5 square, maybe I'll just put a rook on E5. Maybe I won't even put my knight there. And look at the queen trade. Why not? That's Black's best piece. Rook E5 later, rook E1, maybe this rook to C5. This pawn is going to be a target.
There's a lot of problems in Black's position here. And I really appreciate Tania for, honoring the light squared bishop as a French player, but it's not doing well in these positions. And it's really difficult to see where it is going to be developed now. Perhaps you could consider playing bishop d7, bishop c6, but there's so much damage done to the position already that even putting the bishop all the way to c6 is not gonna help much.
Right. And that's a very good point. You could put the bishop on d5 in one turn, and that's great. It protects c4, protects e6, attacks the queen. But white just kind of has a free hand to remaneuver the pieces. So I'm not really enjoying the look of this. I think you just have to play bishop d7, and maybe she's worried about b3 because then this b file can be open.
Right, b3, I mean, on one hand, you see this pawn on c4 could be both the weakness, but also the strength of Black. Do you want to remove this weakness rather than simply trying to capture it by playing queen e2 and start an attack on the pawn? Or do you want to trade it and, simply remove this strength of Black, basically? It's a bit difficult to decide what to do with the pawn, but I would say queen e2 would have made sense to play.
Totally. So bishop b7, that way of queen e2, there's rook c8, so at least we can defend our pawn for the time being. But you're right that if Black does nothing, if you make a random move like h6, queen e2 is about to win a pawn. So now at least queen e2, there's b5. That is Tania's intention. And she's just keeping an eye on that a2 pawn. Not sure if she'll actually capture it, but it's hanging.
It is hanging, and I don't see how the queen can get trapped over there. So because of the pawn on c4 being such a strong pawn over there. So it is indeed hanging, and it's not so clear how you would want to defend. Do you want to play a3 here? It allows a lot of weak squares to be there in white's position, but Black can't do anything about this. So perhaps a3 is a sensible move here.
Yeah, and can this bishop move to d7, or does that just drop this pawn on b7? And you could make an argument that you want to lose that pawn to open the b file for some counterplay, but a pawn is a pawn, and I'm really struggling with these positions from Black's perspective. It just feels like every single game we've looked at, it's so easy to see 7 different plans for white, and even finding one plan that doesn't lose material for Black is difficult.
I agree with you, Robert. It's indeed very difficult to find a plan here for Black. I'm guessing that you would want to defend that pawn on b7 and then consider playing bishop d7, bishop c6. And it feels like Tania is going for it. She plays rook b8, defending the pawn on b7. And Eric goes for the queen trade once again.
Right, because after the queen trade, let's say takes, rook b takes, you have to play b5, and then this rook goes up to e5, and no fun. This bishop needs to stay protecting this pawn. The next rook comes over to e1. There is 0 weaknesses in white's position, 0, and black has like 4.
Right, and I think the problem is that they're not just weaknesses, but they're permanent weaknesses. You're never able to push this pawn on e6 ever. Not in a million years are you ever going to push that pawn. And I think that's what hurting black most here, because you can have those weaknesses but still have some counterplay. But because of those permanent weaknesses, getting that counterplay is really difficult. And I would really start to consider pushing a5, b4 with the black pieces here.
At least it gives you something to target, right? It might cost you a pawn in some of the variations, but an open b file will be nice. Said h6 played, and so many moves look. Even the move d5. I know we're talking about e6 as a weakness, but we can just start crashing through on the d file, on the e file, and perfectly situated white pieces.
White has a phenomenal position. Eric is doing so well, making use of those strong squares that he has at his disposal, and he's playing very solid. He's not in a rush, and yeah, he plays d5 now, and I think it's the right time because there are so many weaknesses in black's position, and with the rooks on the 5th rank, you can do so much.
Yeah, those rooks are great pieces, and maybe just rook c5, knight d4. At some point, black is going to have to lose a pawn. I don't really think that there's a future where Tania keeps material equality, but maybe being down just one pawn in certain rook endgames give her chances.
Right, and he goes for rook d6 here, so he's not sticking to keeping the rooks on the 5th rank, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I think he just wants every single dark square covered. So we have all the pieces on dark squares because of light square bishop, and bishop f3, king f3, f5's under attack. The 7th rank is vulnerable. I don't think it works.
Well, at least the bishop got to e4, Robert. I think that's already a big achievement.
I'm very proud of that bishop. You're right. No, it's the best bishop we've seen today, probably. But here comes one rook. Here comes the second. a7's hanging the e5 square for this knight. Rook g6 is another threat.
Oh, that does not look great indeed. You would want to play rook d8 in this position with the black pieces, but rook g6 kills that move pretty much, as you cannot stop the threat of g7, attacking on g7.
Yeah, it's easy to forget about that because we think doubling rooks in the 7th, which is what we typically want to do, was the plan, but having rook g6 was lights out. And that was a mistake. So rook d7, which is such a natural looking move, was a mistake, but it wasn't because of bishop e4. It's undoubtedly because of bishop takes knight and trying to save your pawn.
Knight d4, and there's just no entrance here for black and white's position. I mean, knight to d4 blocks the entire d file. If you ever consider entering through the e file, the knight is looking right at the square on e2, so you have no access to white's position, and that's what's so difficult for black here.
Yeah, and there was a funny blunder. So if I just make a random move like king h8, rook g7, king g7, thinking, oh, look at this fork, woo, your knight gets trapped at the end. So after king f6, knight here, king e7, your knight doesn't get away. So you think you're pawn and being clever, but you're too clever for your own good.
That's a really impressive tactic, Robert. Nice spot.
Yeah, because I was thinking what happens if white were to play rook takes g7. I was looking at the fork, but Tania played g5, so it's kind of a moot point anyway. And now she does play king h8 because she wants activity.
Oh, she found a way to get into white's position. Now, is it enough? Because she has still so many weaknesses, but this is definitely allowing her some sort of counterplays. I would not sign her off in this game just yet.
I agree. Rook g8 is a big move, and she's actually ahead on the clock. So it's a change of story, different narrative than previous games. And Eric down to 20 seconds.
This might turn things around. I mean, obviously, white has a phenomenal position, but you know, the engine, the evil part is saying +4, but where is this +4 in the position? It's not that clear. So you need to be really precise here and actually prove that it's +4.
And Eric down to 10 seconds now. Tania needs to play quickly. Just play king h7. There it goes. Now play rook g8. Just go. Trust yourself. Rook g4, maybe something like that. But then
probably king e3.
That's annoying. But then rook g2. Yeah,
anyways?
We're on the same wavelength here. And look, now it's even. See, this is what happened. No, there's no check on A8. Do not blunder your rook.
Ooh.
Oh my
Close
God.
call, Eric, to 4 seconds.
She takes that pawn. She can go rook h4 now. Just go after the h. Just take all the pawns.
H4, you gotta be careful for forks over here.
That's true. That is the one big concern. A4 is a great choice by Eric.
Great move.
Probably can just make a draw if she wants it.
Eric declines it.
But all of his pawns are going away.
Wow, it's such a cleanup in this position.
Yeah, it's now even material. And we'll
Eric
see.
down to 2 seconds. He really needs to speed up here.
Check, king e3, so he can essentially pre-move that. And now she goes to the pawn. I would try to go checkmate this black king. Try to bring the king in somehow.
If you want check, keep on giving checks.
Don't go king c5. Okay, king c5 would have blundered a piece.
And
We'll
the
see it.
repetition.
That was really a good fight by Tanya. And that's the thing, right? When she has enough time, even though she had a worse position, she was able to hold that game. That was the last game of the 5+1 portion. But Anamaya, I'm curious, you made a comment suggesting that with the shorter time controls, she'll be forced to play quickly in the opening. So maybe the next time control will be better for her.
This might actually be the case because as you saw in the last game, she was playing very quickly. She was ahead on the clock at one point and she kept this lead until the end of the game. So she's capable of playing well when she's short on time, but she needs to be able to keep that time management going throughout the rest of the game because you never know when that time deficit will hurt you in the end. So I'm really curious to see how things will be in the upcoming time controls.
Well, you don't have to be curious too much longer because after this very short break, we'll be back with the 3+1 portion of this matchup between Eric Rosen and Tania Sachdev here at the IMSCC Speeches Championship, brought to you by chess.com.
Want to hold a massive chess tournament with dozens of clubs or hundreds of players? Or maybe a small chess tournament with local but competitive clubs? With Club Arenas, you can. Club Arenas allow for tournaments of any size with any number of clubs and players. Customize the arena with any time control, with standard chess or mini chess variants, and with any starting position you want. Club Arenas are the most flexible tournament format on chess.com. Try one out today.
Welcome back, everyone, to the I'm Not a GM Speed Chess Championship. We have finished the 5+1 portion of the match. We are heading to the 3+1 portion of this match between Tania Sachdev and Eric Rosen. But before we do, let's have a look at the WSCC event that is happening right at this moment. Today we had the knockout, the qualifier, the first qualifier happening. And 8 players qualified for the knockout tomorrow. So I will be commentating together tomorrow with an amazing fellow commentator. I'm sorry, Robert, not with you, but we'll be bringing you this action tomorrow. It will be, I believe it will be 1 p.m. Central European time when the knockout will be starting. We have 8 players that qualified today. So if you want to participate yourself, all women titled players are invited to play in the second qualifier. The second qualifier is in 2 days from now on Thursday, 8 a.m. PT and 5 p.m. Central European time.
Wow. Well, you know what, Anamaya? Well, I'm not commentating with you. It's okay. I will live. I'm glad I could be such a good role model because instead of competing yourself, you'll be commentating. So you see how this happens, right? You know, you're not going to be playing in the qualifier. You're going to be commentating on them. So I still have an influence, even if I don't get to be your co-commentator for the event.
Absolutely, Robert. And I'm super excited for tomorrow because the girls today were fighting for the top 8. And tomorrow we will see them actually live in action.
Yes, no, it was a really great event. I saw the standings and, of course, the people who are already entered into the field. It's super strong event, so I'm looking forward to it, as I am every single year. And I guess we're just a few moments away from the next games beginning here in the I'm Not GM Speed Chess Championship match between Eric Rosen and Tania Sachdev. It is a 4-point lead. It's ballooned for Eric Rosen, but we'll see now in the shorter time, if Tania, if she can gather her bearings and if she can strike back.
Right, and let's have a look at the Smarter Chess predictions for this part of the match, because we have different predictions for this time. The first one was horribly wrong, Robert. Am I right?
First of all, I love how enthusiastically you said that Smarter Chess was incorrect, because it was as wrong as it gets.
Right. The prediction was 4-4, which is very much incorrect. And the prediction for the 3+1 portion is 3.5 to 3.5. So let's see what what the players will bring us this time. I'm very curious to see if the prediction will be right this time.
You know, I always doubt Smarter Chess, and somehow they end up being correct in some way, shape, or form. But right now, we've seen d takes c5 play. This is familiar to an earlier game. And look at Eric. He's allowing the queen trade on d8. And a lot of people wouldn't want that. They would have taken on d3 first, which would have developed White's bishop, but allowed the king to castle. But this is an end game, or let's call it a queenless middle game. But the king often belongs in the center. So don't just play king e7 because I said that. You walk right into e5, but play h6 first. Then you can, if the bishop comes back, you could play g5, and eventually your king will likely play to e7.
Both players have played the end games really well. So I'm curious to see where this is going as we're also as we are in the 3+1 portion of the match, the players have less time on their clock, but now they are in this queenless middle game, as you said, pretty early. So they barely spend time on their clock. And this might favor Tania, as she tends to spend a lot of time on her moves. Now, without the queens on the board, the position might be at least a little bit more easier.
Yeah, there's some clarity here. There's a lot of open space. Wow, that move, how could that be -2? Like bishop e5 looks like a pretty normal move, but I guess the problem is you're going to lose a pawn. So after the bishop's under attack, if you play bishop f6, knight f6, e4 is threatened, and so is, okay, bishop, I was looking at bishop takes f2 ideas, but there's a pin, but now bishop f2 is a threat with knight g4 forking.
Oh, and there's a lot of problems in the White's position already, and that goes to show how important it is to have good development of your pieces, because Black has developed almost all their pieces, right? The king was pretty much the only problem in the position. It's fine on e7 now, but on the other hand, we have White having still the king on e1. It's not a big deal, but the other pieces are also undeveloped. The bishop was still in f1, the rook is still in h1, and is not able to do much just yet. And that's why Black has already such a nice advantage already.
Yeah, and there's pressure down the e4 pawn, so b4 played, and if knight to a4 attacking the bishop, as you see, Eric didn't even need me to say it, he just does it, and look at this, bam. Bam. Just like very clear pressure in the center. Black is -4.5 is extreme for a position that's even material, but it's not going to be even material for much longer. If you play e5, the knight comes to g4. I mean, look at this. All of White's pieces are retreating or stuck, and this is no good.
This is not looking good indeed, and the bishops are just sniping on along those diagonals, and it's really difficult for White to deal with this. Now knight g4 in the position as well. There's the knight takes f2 threat. You could even consider sacrificing on d3 if you want to. You don't have to, but yeah, there's a lot of problems in White's position, and you can only defend so many threats, right?
It looks completely lost. Yeah, it's how do you even defend this pawn? If you bring this rook to f1, it's funny. Black can even take this pawn and go right back. So this is as miserable a position as it gets for Tania. And that it didn't look great after she wheeled her bishop to g3, but putting it again on e5, she spent 1, 2, 3, 4 turns with that bishop, and it really cost her.
Really cost her the development, and she's struggling to put her pieces on the right squares now, because Black's pieces are developed really well, very naturally. They're doing their job, whereas White's pieces are pretty passive, very defensive, and very much undeveloped. So that's why it's so difficult for White to play right now. And rook df1 makes a lot of sense, but now knight takes f2, and you can't take that knight because rook takes, bishop takes, and you will lose sight of the bishop on d3.
Yeah, that king is doing an important job, and it's being tasked in both directions. So she just resigns. Now it's a 5-point lead for Eric. And yeah, that opening didn't go her way. Let's see. Oh no. Please change your opening.
Back.
Please do something different. Oh gosh, I'm nervous.
We're back to the same line. Will she switch it up? Okay, knight c6. I think queen c7 is what she played.
Yeah, she's been playing queen c7. And then after knight d to f3, she's been playing knight e4. But this has been working perfectly.
Okay.
Okay.
That's an improvement. So is she going to play knight e4 now? I don't think so. Okay, queen e5. Looks like she found an improvement during the break.
She has. And I think the move here that Eric should play is just king f1. And it doesn't look great because we like to castle connect our rooks. But we can see where Eric's pieces are positioned towards Black's king. So maybe there's h4 and a rook lift in the future. So it's not the end of the world that the rook is buried on h1 for the time being.
White has a lot of play in this position still, and it's not so clear where Black is supposed to be playing. With this knight on e5, it's disturbing so much. And once again, this bishop on c8, where is it heading to? If only you could play bishop to a6 to trade off the light squared bishops, that would be in Black's favor by a lot. So let's see if Tania is able to pull that off at some point.
Yeah, I think the best move is bishop c8 to c7. Just fight for that e5 square, but she takes an e5 with her bishop. She couldn't take with the knight because then pawn takes would have been a little fork, and that bishop was hanging there just a moment ago. If you gave white a free turn, knight takes e6, followed by bishop takes d6 is a free piece. So that's just why the capture happened, and now she's thinking again. So it just feels like Tania has not found a way to deal with this London system, and I shook my head. And during game one, when we saw the London, maybe I should be nodding in approval because the London looks amazing. It's the best opening I've ever seen based on this match.
Eric has convinced you. I can't believe it, Robert.
You know, I'm crying on the inside. It's when I'm saying something out loud. I'm wearing that mask where to hide my tears. But the London system looks awesome the way this match has gone.
It looks awesome indeed. Looking at Eric's positions, he has been doing so well, and it goes to show, I mean, it's his specialty. He's so good at the London system, and it shows really in the games as well. He's dealing super well with the positions, and he makes it look so easy.
He has. And well, what's going on here? Knight came into d2 and went around to c4. So that knight didn't really have anywhere to go from e4 except forward and back. And once it's here, is that knight going to b2? And you think, oh, b3, let me kick your knight. Yeah, Black can take here or bring the knight into b2 with a fork, depending on which bishop you want to take.
And this is definitely an improvement for Tania compared to the other positions from the London, because now this knight on c4, obviously white has a bishop pair, but it's not so simple for white to deal with this. And it looks actually like we're about to see one of the bishops being traded off for the knight. And this bishop on c8 could come back to life one way or the other, going to d7 or going through a6.
Right. And I'm just noticing that knight takes b2 is a threat, but there's bishop takes h7 check followed by queen c2 takes b2. So that means that perhaps white can back this bishop up. He decided to take on c4, but now your point definitely holds true that this bishop can get out and have a diagonal to work with.
Right, we see queen c2 attacking the pawn on c4, so b5 looks like a logical move, but at the same time, you still need to develop your pieces, and queen e4 might be a little bit annoying to deal with. It's not the end of the world as you always have a move like bishop d7, but you still need to look out for moves like that. And at the same time, white has a really nice center, so it's not so clear if black is doing that fine in this position.
But Tania goes to, shows us all that, this pawn on c4 could have been captured, but had white captured the pawn on c4, here comes a rook to c8. She's like, I don't care about material equality. I want activity. Where's this queen going? If you go to b3, here comes bishop a4. If you go to d3, there's bishop b5 is an idea. And all of a sudden, black's pieces are coming to life. Control of the c file. This queen keeping an eye on a2. And if the queen moves away, queen d2. So black suddenly has great play. So that's why instead of taking the pawn, Eric is operating around it, and he offers a queen trade. And he says, opposite colored bishops, that doesn't mean we're just going to make a draw. If you take on c3, my bishop covers the b8 square, just a better piece. So that's why Tania says, no trades for you.
Wow, and we see f6 in a position trying to get rid of that bishop on e5, but this bishop will be able to dance around along those diagonals so well. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting position because of the opposite color bishops, and we've yet to see who favors this more, because black is not able to do that much with the bishop just yet, but it's not the worst piece we've seen throughout this match. But his bishop on d6 is definitely doing a great job as tying the pieces together of black.
It's true. And queen c6, queen a3 defending that bishop. And what next? Where's black going here? c3, not out of the question, just to start trading pieces. a7 is not hanging because d6 is loose, so that gives Tania at least a move, but she has to move, and she does play c3.
She has 20 seconds on the clock. Now, as I mentioned before, the time difference is not that big. Earlier in the 5+1 portion, the time difference was much bigger because they started with much more time, and Tania was spending a lot of time at the start already. So that's already some sort of improvement, as Eric is also spending his time here. So might see a big time scramble here again.
Yes, and Tania has looked pretty good in some of these time scrambles. She's ready pre-move, good. She can bring her next rook over to c8, and she has potential for an outside pass pawn. She's up a pawn over there on the queen side.
b6, I like that move. It allows moves like a4, a5, but it stops from the bishop from going to c5 for the time being. And it looks like she is having the upper hand in the position right now.
Bishop a4. Look at it. She's finding great moves.
She does.
Rook c2. King has to go back, I guess, when then rook c1 was there. Oh gosh, where's this king going? Is that mate? It's almost mate. The king is f4.
Almost. Not just yet, because after f5, you can simply go to e5 with the king.
Right. That king gets to run. Don't go to e4 now. There's bishop c2. So now check, king d3. Bring the other rook in. The king's going on a walk, but it doesn't look like it's a walk in the park.
She's going for the repetition.
You got to play for a win. You're down by 5 points.
Oh, she really needed that point. She had a great position, but she was not so sure about her chances there, which is really unfortunate because she had a great chance over there.
Yeah, you can just tell she's not accustomed to playing much blitz, because in those situations, you just have to take the risk. You're doing well on the clock. Your opponent's king is in danger. You can make moves quickly. Eric would have had to find ways not to get checkmated or drop material. So yeah, it's not really going well for her in that respect, but she changed her opening now. Instead of her pawn being on e4, her pawn's on e3, so we haven't seen Eric play c5 yet. And there it is.
There we go. There you go, c5. And Black has a really nice position, right? If you get your bishop to b7, it's like a huge contrast between the way that Tania is dealing with her light squared bishop. Eric is developing it right away to b7, and it works out so well. He has a very nice position. The other pieces still needs to be developed, but it's already like a really decent and a solid position, and there's not much you need to worry about.
Right. And after b4, we have a concession, because the c4 square is where this knight can hop to. The pawn on b5 was taking that away. This bishop now stares all the way towards a6. So every pawn move comes at some kind of price, and it's not that Black did anything wrong. Everything is okay for the time being, but the c4 square, maybe even this b3 square, and this pawn on b4 could become a target.
And we see c takes d4, e takes d4. Now this pawn on d4 is quite vulnerable, as well as the square right in front of it. And that is what Black could make use of right now. You can either put the bishop on d5 or the knight from f6 to d5, giving more space to the knight on d7.
Tania needs to play this move right here. Yeah, I think Black is going to play it now, but what you want to do is keep this pawn stuck on a6, because you had your queen and bishop lined up. It would have kept the rook tied down to that pawn, so it had to stay on a8. But instead she has knight c4. Can't really blame her for that. But if I'm Eric, I'm already thinking about a5, just so I don't have to worry about my queen side later.
Knight to b6. Eric wants to trade off the knights. As more pieces being traded off favors Black, he would be more than happy to trade off the knights here, because the pawn d4 will become more and more vulnerable.
That's right. The knights go off, that pawn is a problem. And these players just don't want to push this pawn to a5. Neither of them are looking that way. Play a5. I promise you it's a good move. You are leaving this pawn stuck in place, and it becomes a target forever.
I don't think they believe you, Robert. It's a bit upsetting, but they don't believe in the a5 move. You
know why they don't believe me? Because I just said before the London system is good, and they know it's not true, so they don't believe anything that comes out of my mouth anymore. And I get it. I'm fully with you, no matter who you are out there. However, pawn on a5 is definitely a good thing, because you're keeping this pawn stuck in place. Now, actually, I played knight a5. No, it's good that you didn't play pawn a5. Play knight a5. Okay,
there we go. There we go.
She's just brighter than I am.
We see knight a5 on the board, and you might say knight on the edge of the board. What is it doing there? But it's on such a beautiful spot. It's disturbing this bishop on b7, and potentially you would even want to consider playing rook c1, knight c6. So there's a lot of potential for this knight on a5.
That's right. And okay, yeah, it took a while, but f takes e3 was automatic. And I was wondering, what is Tania thinking about? She could have blundered. Queen takes e3. First of all, you don't want to do that. You want to fix your pawns. But this allows knight to g4, followed by bishop takes f3, followed by queen takes h2, checkmate. So there was nothing to think about. And those little moments they're really those moments where Tania needs to just play. Like, she knows what the right move is, but she's spending a few seconds rather than essentially pre-moving it.
Right, and f takes e3, her center is very solid. If only she could get her pawn to e4 safely, because then she will have much more control over the position. And we might see e4 happen. Let's see what she plays here.
She could also just hop that knight in. Nope, she plays e4. She wants to establish the center and maybe play e5 and remove that knight from a kingside defender.
And note, Robert, how Tania is up on the clock here. She has 1 minute and 24 seconds, which is a lot, because since she started with 3 minutes.
Okay, this pawn on e4 is hanging. So bishop takes a6 is maybe play a5. not
back to it, Robert.
Not to repeat myself, but she plays e5. She's going to win this pawn though. So a5 wasn't necessary.
I was going to say, will we, we should start a bet. Are we going to see a5 in a position in this game or
yes.
no? But
yes, we will. No. White's going to play that soon. I promise. A5 is coming.
Be careful what you wish for, Robert.
I'm just looking. Let's get some trades here. Great. Bishop c5 does attack a pin pawn. So
I don't think we're seeing a5.
Oh my gosh, are we never going to see a5 in this game?
Queen c4, and Eric is putting more pressure on this pawn, but it's very well defended by the knight, so there's not much to be worried about just yet. But with this,
rook takes d4.
I spoke too soon.
Rook
there is
d4.
this queen on a7, putting right towards the king.
Oh my gosh, and even in those positions, like, she had to play king h1, just get the king off the diagonal. Rook takes d4, winning on the spot. Eric finds it, and the problem is there's nowhere for this queen to hide. Like, after knight takes, rook takes, no matter where this rook moves from d4, it's going to be check to this king on g1. And the queen would have to be able to hide somewhere. There's nowhere to run to.
Right, and one idea would be to put the queen on f2, but you're not able to, because queen e2, rook d2 check, and your queen will be lost anyways.
Yeah, and the pawn never went to a5. You were correct, Anamaya.
Yeah, and this is very unfortunate sequence of events for Tania, and also for you, Robert, because a5 is out of the question.
Although rook a7, rook a8 check, there's bishop to f8. So that's fortunate there for Eric, because if not for this idea, rook a7 was going to be a nasty threat. And okay, Tania wants rook d8. You don't have it because there's mate down here.
Still got to be careful, but yeah, this is very easy to play for Eric. He has the bishop still. He can play g6, king g7, and be safe.
Although, can you just chase the queen? Like, this rook to d8 and then keep chasing this queen around?
Oh, hold up a second. It's not
Right.
that simple.
Yeah, the queen. Oh, she went the wrong way.
Oh, she didn't have time for that.
Okay, that's really good because you defend this and mate is coming.
And yeah, the bishop will come to c5, and there we see the queen and bishop actually working well together. Queen f1 is not looking good.
No, it is not.
Tania's still trying to go for that repetition.
I think bishop g1 is probably... Oh, wait. Are you serious?
I did not think that was actually going to happen.
Are you serious? Up a queen and that was a draw by repetition?
You could see Eric just smiling there, letting you allow this to happen. What?
I'm pulling that game up. What? What? I think I know what happened. All right, if I'm remembering correctly, his queen went from f2 to f4, and then it went like this. So probably in his head, he was like, it's not quite a repetition because my queen didn't start on the same square. But this position has already happened, and it's the third time that the king was on h1 after queen f4 check. Yikes.
Wow. Well, nice save by Tanya. I think her power lays in the repetition. She has pulled off many repetitions this match.
And well, it is a London still, but she changed her opening. I'm very happy about that. So you said her power and repetition. I think in the case of the Lund system, her now power is in avoiding whatever's been happening game after game.
Absolutely, and this is looking much, much better already. Knight c6. This early knight e4, you might say that it's, I mean, you get a lot of space early on, but you don't want to move pieces twice unless you have a very good reason to in the opening. And that's exactly why this knight e4 move wasn't great. And instead, she's developing now, making very healthy and sound moves, and not many problems for her, none whatsoever.
Yeah, mutual isolated pawns here. White is ahead in development. White goes first, right? So now this is finally getting this bishop out, and there's just some pressure. You're gonna have to watch out for your pawns hanging, and Tanya covers the b7 pawn, d5 is protected, but even a move like bishop e5 is going to come with some serious threats. Oh gosh.
Oh, bishop b5 on the spot, but what after queen f5, attacking the bishop on f4?
Yeah, just take the rook.
Just take the rook, and you'll be up in exchange. And oh, the bishop is hanging on e7. That is the problem.
Yeah, it's just a free exchange. And Tanya, she has not found her footing on the black side of the London system.
She has been speeding up, which is really nice to see for her, but it's just not there. The positions, they're not in her favor.
Nope. And it is a 6-point lead in Eric's favor right now. And I just feel like Tanya needs to somehow deviate, but still feel good about the position she's getting. And I think Eric just has shown tremendous class in this match.
I agree. And we see a similar opening. Have we seen the move g3 before? I feel like that's a new move in this match.
It is. We're going to get a Catalan, and okay, can take this pawn here on d4 with the knight. But another one of these situations where it's early in the game, so it's fine for Tanya to spend some time. But it just felt like a move she could have played quickly, although she may not be familiar with this variation. I think the move here is knight to d to b5, and you just go for some of these weak dark squares. Your bishop's on a great diagonal, but it's clear the players are kind of on their own right now.
Yeah, and queen a4 check is another idea that could be considered at some point, but now with the knight being under attack twice, you have to deal with that first, as the queen is only covering it from d1 just now. So she does play the move knight to d to b5, but as you mentioned, she's spending quite some time here, and with the time control being 3+1, she can't afford to spend so much time so early on. But for now, it's still fine. They still have over 2 minutes on the clock, so it's not too concerning just yet.
Yeah, just take back with the knight here, knight a6 covering knight c7 fork. Now you can play knight e3 to go after this pawn. And you may think, wait, but I'll just take your knight away. You're not getting this pawn. But after the bishop takes, rook c1 to follow, this bishop on g2 is an absolute monster.
I really like the opening choice of Tanya. Her pieces are doing much better. Even though the bishop is still on c1 and knight is on d1, it looks a little bit odd, but the pieces are able to develop to clear squares. You can go bishop e3, as you mentioned, rook to c1, and the pawns, at least the pawn on c4 is not the greatest of black. So that's something that black needs to be careful with for sure.
And I kind of am a little nervous to say this out loud because our viewers would say, oh, Robert said you don't have to castle, so don't do it. But castle felt premature. It wasn't necessary. Why does your king have any problem in the center? I really thought starting with knight e3 was better because I don't see what white has gained from castling. In fact, I think it just slows you down from that move knight e3, which you want to play. And it may not be a problem, right? It might not be a big deal, but why castle in the first place when you could have just had a more direct path? And here actually goes to show why castling may have been imprecise. Now you don't really have knight e3, at least not very appealing, because there are two pieces covering the square.
Makes a lot of sense, Robert. And also because of the fact that the queens are off the board, there's not much you need to worry about. So there's a lot of reasons to not castle in this position. So that might even be why we might not see Eric Castle here. He might even just play king e7 just because his king will be around his pieces and the rooks will be connected either way.
Yeah, I opened up chat. You know I never do that, but as soon as I said, I'm nervous about saying don't castle, I want to see what they said. Everyone is saying that they learned now from me to not castle. Great. I'm glad that happened. But look at this. E4 played, knight back to b6. And are you going to win back this pawn? Because black is ready to play bishop to d7 to kick this knight out of here. You close your own bishop off with the move e4. So e4 is a move you often don't want to play in the Catalan.
Which makes a lot of sense because the bishop on g2 will be locked by the pawn on e4. However, now, okay, I was going to suggest bishop e3, but knight e3 makes a lot of sense as she's trying to put pressure on this pawn on c4 right away. So with knight e3, it screams for bishop takes a3.
Yeah, bishop takes a3 just looks good. You hurt white's pawn structure. And Eric plays rook c8. He's tactically defending the pawn because a bishop takes f2 check at the end of the variation. So either way, this feels like Tania's not getting her material back. And so Eric has the advantage. But bishop takes a3 was a better try.
Right, and we see rook c8. What is Tania going to do here? Because her pieces are struggling a little bit. She does take the pawn on c4 anyways, but this does allow knight takes c4, and perhaps there is a bishop b5 move because now the knight is on the same diagonal as the rook.
Yeah, bishop b5 is good. I was just looking at the just brute force method with bishop takes f2 check and rook takes c4. But now that you pointed out, I kind of like bishop b5 even more. Instead of grabbing material, let me just grab a dominant position. And let's go back. Let's bring up the analysis board because we see the evaluation bar is hovering around the middle. I like your idea more. Bishop b5, forcing b3. And after it takes, what black does is play bishop d4. And I can't take c4 without dropping b7. But I put my knight on c5. And I don't mind. This is just dominant piece play for black.
It looks amazing for black, and which is really crazy, right? Because white has a pair of bishops, but they're not able to do much, and this pawn on e4 is disturbing the light squared bishop so much. So that makes it super difficult for white to create some play here.
Right, so bishop b5, a little bit more patient, but we saw bishop f2, rook c4, and black is a pawn ahead. And finally, that bishop is open. Bishop f1 almost wins material, but I guess there's rook a4 just in time, or there's also rook e4 to attack this bishop.
There's a lot of ways for black to deal with that indeed, as the bishop on e3 is simply hanging. So it's only a matter of time, I think, before those. I mean, white has a pair of bishops, right? And I feel like because the position is so open, it is only a matter of time till those bishops can actually try to do a lot here, but it's not so clear where they're heading right now as black is dominating on the queen side.
And I'm looking at the clocks, by the way. They're both under 20 seconds now, around 15 seconds each. Knight back to b7, kicking the rook out of here. The rook retreats, and now it's all about who's going to be playing better on the time scramble.
Bishop d4. It's not so clear where the pieces can go to of white. Bishop e4. You want to centralize your pieces as Tania is doing, but what's next? Because your own pawns are blocking you.
Yeah, this is not even a good bishop on d4. And with the trade of pieces, this knight will eventually be able to reroute. There's control in the c file. Rook c2, trade some pieces, bring the knight around. And this, unfortunately for Tania, is going to be another defeat.
Knight to d8 had the clear plan in mind to go into c6, and Tania stopping that. So okay, he finds his way somewhere else. Again, knight b7 to c5 as a pawn pushed to b5. But Tania says not so fast. Bishop a3 pins the knight.
Yeah, really good decision. And now she can take, well, rook e3.
Oh, rook e3.
As soon as I say the words good decision, she walks into a piece loss with rook d3 check. And unfortunately for her, it's just really, everything's falling apart. And it's a 7-point lead for Eric, who calmly moves on to the next game.
He is showing a great performance today. And Tania, unfortunately for Tania, she was struggling with the time first, the time controls. But now she's simply blundering whenever she's doing just fine. And it hurts her a lot as we are in the time scrambles. She seems to struggle a little bit, so that makes it very difficult for her.
Right. And you know, when you start losing games, you just feel out of the match. So 7-point deficit. We'll see if she's able to start getting back into this a little bit. But at this point, I'm sure she's not feeling great about how the match has gone. And she's playing solidly with black. Eric chose C4 instead of continue to go with the London. And yeah, I think I'm already happier with how Tania has exited the opening.
This is very normal in the English opening. Bishop d3 is setting up some threats along this diagonal, putting pressure on the pawn h7, as well as threatening bishop e4 to hit on the knight on c6. And with b4, you want to put the bishop on b2. So Eric has a clear idea. Let's see where Tania decides to develop her pieces.
I'm sort of regretting what I was just saying, because I liked it at first glance, and now that after g6, it doesn't seem like Tania has an idea here. You can't play f5 because then you lose your queen. Bishop b2 is about to happen, followed by bishop e4, trying to take this knight and win the e5 pawn. You can throw in h4, h5. I see so many different ideas for white, and for black, I'm just struggling how not to lose material.
Right, and bishop f6 is a very creative way of dealing with this position. She's trying to defend the pawn on e5, but she might be heading to g7, which is actually quite a typical spot for the bishop. Perhaps not in this opening, but in these kind of structures, you can put the bishop on g7 and start attacking with f5, which could be quite interesting for black.
Yeah, but Eric's moves, every single piece just connected with each other, and b5 is a possibility at some moment. The c7 pawn was hanging out, was protected. b7 will be defended when the knight moves back. So I do like that Eric is not putting his pawn on b5, because it gives Tania at least one target once the knight moves.
Right, and she goes with the idea bishop to g7. Let's see if she will decide to play f5. But for now, it's clear that white has a really solid position, and there's a lot of things that white can do here. You can consider playing b5, you can consider playing, you can even try to play knight to g5. It might do not that much, but if you consider moves like f5, knight to g5 will definitely be in the air. And there we see queen c5, so if Tania decides to play f5 now, there's a clear threat of bishop d5.
Yikes. Yeah, that would just lose the queen on the spot. But I like what you're pointing out. The knight g5, even without winning the queen, would force the queen off the diagonal, and that would cause black some problems with this king on g8. So rook e8, calm move. All right, I like that. And for white, how many more small improvement moves can we make? Like, can we make a rook c2, a rook c1? Do we need that kind of stuff? Or should we start trying to punch through here?
I think it's time to punch through. You would say maybe rook to d1, but do we need this rook just yet? Perhaps you can already consider playing b5.
Yeah, I guess b5 taken away, although not completely. Sometimes you do this just to open up the b file, but with the bishop on d7, I guess not right here.
Right, and you also got to keep in mind that there are moves like bishop f8 to try to get the queen from c5. So that could be something to consider in this position already.
Yeah, that's true. Bishop f8 is just a way to kick the queen, and there it's played. And where is this queen going? You go to c3, then maybe the bishop goes back to g7, and look at Eric says, let's go with the queen trade here. e5 will be loose. You're trying to remove one defender. So if we get a trade, bishop takes c6 as a threat, and there's also knight g5 that you pointed out. So I'm liking this. I'm definitely liking it.
Yeah, for white, it looks amazing. And it's really difficult to find, again, a nice play here for Tania. Now, with e4, you allow moves like knight to d4, but now with the rook on c1, it's pretty much impossible to move the knight as the c7 pawn drops.
King f8 somehow is now +2. So let's think about what could happen. a4 followed by b5 is what you'd want. Do you have to be worried about this pawn under attack? There might be a bishop a3 there. So a4, bishop a3, and this pawn is loose. This knight isn't doing the most. So maybe there's a rerouting of the knight. Knight e1, knight d3, knight c5. It seems slow when you say it like that, but it's a very clear plan.
Absolutely, and we see a4 being played indeed. Bishop a3. Eric is seeing this idea. Wow.
Yeah, it's just the brute force method, and b7 is hanging. Just take that. Then you can go rook takes b4 and go for this.
And this is crushing Can even take on b4 with the rook, but it's probably a bit too much. You don't need to do that.
Yeah, because then you're up only one pawn, and then it's two bishops against knight bishop combo. So it still looks good. I have no problem with that. But maybe there's something even better. Maybe just bishop takes, pawn takes, rook takes, and keep the rooks on the board.
Looks great for to me. And as we look at the clock, time is down to 15 seconds, which is also not a lot. But at least the time difference there, it's relatively small. So yeah, it's just a really rough position for Tania overall.
And bishop e8 went to +7.
It's wild.
Like trying to figure out, then you must be winning a piece somewhere. So you can't play bishop c6, so the knight can take. You can take and play here, but that doesn't look that convincing. Oh my gosh, just simple.
Oh wow, you just get rid of the pawn because how do you defend it?
You can't. Even if you move your king out the way, your rook is still going to be pinned next. Now rook takes a5, and that's game. Don't pre-move bishop takes e7 though, because if knight takes d5, the knight would then defend that rook over there.
Right. And that's another point for Eric. Wow, he's playing so good. He's playing so well.
He's just on fire. And it was already going to be an uphill battle for Tania, but when Eric's in this kind of form, he's going to be a really difficult match for anybody. So Eric now 27-24 Blitz rating. He is definitely one of the favorites in this entire field.
Absolutely. And what is very beautiful to see is that Eric has some really good positions. He's not yet up by material, but he has such strong positions. And the way he's able to convert that to a win, he's very consistent, and he makes it look so easy as well.
He really does. I mean, all of his openings have been sharp. I think he's been getting comfortable positions. And look at this one, another pawn chain from a6 to c4. He's gaining space. He plays h6 when it's needed. He might play g5 followed by knight to e4, and he's just taking over this board.
And the queen side is completely dominated by him. He doesn't even have to play bishop e7, which is like the typical move you want to play in these type of positions. But you don't even have to do it. The bishop is just fine on the other diagonal too.
Yeah. So bishop e6 played, followed by knight c6. And one idea for white is to play a4 and try to crack down on this pawn structure. Another idea is to play knight e5, get a rook to d1 if there's a capture, and that's what she's going for, because d5 can become a quick target.
Right, and that is definitely something that Tania wants to be playing for here. Now, after queen c7, you might want to consider playing f4 and strengthening the center even more, trying to go for maybe even f5 after that. But instead, she takes on f6.
I really like how Eric was willing to give himself double isolated pawns. The Eva bar says that was a great decision. Most of us, myself included, would say, "Oh, this looks terrible. I don't want any part of that." But the bishops are strong. The bishop on e6 is kind of a pawn, but it's a great pawn. Look at that chain, connect 4. We love it. And later in the game, black can use the extra pawn on the queen side to his advantage, whereas white's extra pawn e3, that's clearly not going anywhere.
Right, and Eric plays rook d8. He's playing it very slowly, very solid. He's not rushing it at all. He's playing some really clean chess over here, and we love to see that.
We certainly do. I don't think Tania loves to see it, but everybody else does. And all right, the knight got to f4. You don't want to take and fix that pawn structure for black. So b3 is the choice. And that does give black this pass pawn. I don't think c3 right now is optimal, and Eric drops back to c7 to force this knight to make a decision. But this pass pawn here is just very well defended.
Right, and if you consider playing c3, you potentially have to play b4. You allow the light squared bishop to become active of white. The bishop can go to e2, control this diagonal, consider playing bishop d3, and the bishop will come back to life. It will be much more active, much more powerful. So that is probably why c3 is not going to be played anytime soon by Eric. Instead, he's focusing on the other side of the position for the time being.
Right. Yeah, no, this knight on f4 just needed defense because black put all of his firepower against it. And I'm wondering, would you take this knight on f4? I don't think I would. and he plays c3, which, wow. Oh,
Pawn is just hanging.
okay, the queen was on c6 before, so that changed a lot when the queen dropped back. But I was going to say I didn't like the capture because the e-pawn would have taken, given the e-file. Well, I like this even less because now white's up a pawn.
Right, you might say like there's bishop takes g3, right? You take a pawn, I take a pawn, and we trade the bishops. But instead of taking back the bishop, you play bishop takes f7 first, and then you recapture the bishop. And that's what we're actually going to see on the board.
Yeah, no, it's big miss. Let's go back there for a second. After bishop g3, bishop takes f7 is check. So you have to react to it. If queen takes f7 or king takes, f takes g3, double attack. One pawn on f5, second pawn on c3, and black would be, at the end of this, at least 2 pawns ahead with a much safer king.
That is crushing, and surprisingly enough, she does not play this. She still has a nice position, but the advantage is less clear, as Eric is doing really well on the queen side with this connected passed pawn on c3.
Yeah, that's not going to be pleasant for Tania to deal with. And that means the queen was free to move away because the pawn is doing the heavy lifting. On this side of the board, only one extra pawn. But with your rook tied down, blockading this pawn, black's rook free to maneuver on the e-file. I could see this going in Eric's favor.
I can see that too. He has a lot of potential here. And Tania plays king g2 to get out of any sort of check for the moment, but there will always be checks on the second rank available. So as Eric is improving his position, Tania should be worried about the second rank.
For sure. And you also need to be worried that at some point this pawn could like sacrifice him. So let's say you play rook e1 to defend this pawn here. Maybe black will just start throwing this pawn forward. I guess rook e1, there could also be rook takes d5, so you have to keep an eye on that. But either way, this rook is going to have to deal with this passed pawn.
There's a lot of tactics in this position, even though there are a lot of pieces off the board. And we see rook e1, rook takes d5. And yeah, I would say we would want to take that pawn off the rook off the board with the pawn. But she goes for queen takes h6 instead.
No, this is just getting out of hand for her. It just feels like every game, no matter the position, no matter the clock situation, Eric, he's a little bit more stable in this match. And what's the material count? White is still up a pawn, technically speaking, but look at the powerful pieces that black has everywhere.
The rook on the second rank, that's exactly what you want. And it's very hard to see where the counterplay is for white. You want to get the repetition going, but with the queen on e5, you're not going anywhere. Now c2 is really difficult here for white.
Yeah, I think white has a few checks, but they're going to run out. Queen g4, there's queen g5, and no more checks for you. You can trade queens despite being a pawn down because it's the quality of the pawns, not the quantity.
And perhaps I was gonna say rook d1, but then you fall into queen g4 idea, so that's probably not the way to go to. But queen h5 looks very neat, threatening checkmate in several ways.
Yes, and there are not so many checks. There was a check on g8, but the king would have went to f6, and you run out of checks instantly. So now we see that there's a mate on h2, queen f3 slithering in is checkmate as well, and so Tania resigns, and now Eric has a 9-point lead.
We are heading to the last game of the 3+1 portion. Let's see if Tania is still able to make the match score at least a little bit closer, heading towards the bullet portion of the match. And we see the English opening again.
We do. And the last time this happened, there was a black castle, there was a trade on d5, and this bishop came out to d3. Eric goes right back to it. Why not? It worked perfectly for him. And g6, I didn't like what happened after that, but Tania's like, what else can I do here?
And we see the bishop on e4 again. The g6 move is on the board again, preparing f5, preparing bishop f6 to g7. But is that the right idea? I wouldn't say so, because white has so much play in this position, and this plan of black is super slow.
Yeah, white's plans are just too easy to see, and it's too difficult to see what black does. And that's a problem in Blitz. Sometimes, most of the time in chess, right, we want to be as objective as possible. But when the time controls are shorter, it's often about comfort zones. Eric is playing well. He's playing accurate chess, precise moves, but he's also just more comfortable in every single game. So that's where Tania needs to find herself in the future, is like, what pet lines can I get where I'm not thinking by move 7, and in fact, I'm putting my opponent in time trouble.
Right, and we see rook AC1 on the board, putting more pressure on the c file, and this knight, again, queen c5. And Eric, as you said, it has those really comfortable positions, and that makes it also very easy for him to play. We see on the clock as well, he has barely spent time, as he just knows what he's doing, and he doesn't need to spend so much time to think of a nice plan. It all makes a lot of sense.
Isn't this the same position we saw before? Now the queen went to d6, no rook c8, but it's the same setup as a couple of games ago. And Eric can play rook to d1. You're not afraid of a queen trade. He showed that last time when he brought his queen voluntarily to d5. Queen takes e5 is not the least bit scary. The rook enters the action. e5 is the target, pressured on the c file. So this is once again a great position for Eric.
Yeah, and he might even consider playing a4, b5 over here. He has so much potential in this position. He plays rook d1, improving his position even more. You might want to think, okay, maybe we want to play d4, but after e takes d4, the bishop on e4 will be hanging. It's not so clear anymore. So you got to look out for that. This bishop on e4 is very strong, but it could also be very vulnerable over there.
No, that's a good point, because why else play rook d1 unless you're going to play d4? And eventually you would like to play that move. But as you're pointing out, the bishop just a little bit loose here. And well, what move does black play right now? That's what I'm struggling to find. I was like, do I have a single plan? Not that I see. So she plays h6, which does stop some kind of knight g5 jump, but it's not really a plan. It's just a move.
Right, and it's not so easy to see, right? Like you can play rook d8 here, but where is the plan? You need to find a plan in order to make the right moves, but it's really difficult to see a plan here for black. Like the pieces are more or less developed, but you're just very defensive and passive right now. So how do you continue with this?
Just because I want to attack something, f5, I want to feel alive. So she plays f5, bishop d5 check is the response, and it just doesn't look pleasant. I mean, this bishop transferred from one diagonal to another. This is a pretty nice looking diagonal. And I'm not seeing the follow-up yet, but it's just clear to me that white controls most of the space on this board.
And the problem here for black is that, okay, this bishop on d5 is loose and you want to play rook d8, which Tania does, but how do you actually attack this bishop on d5? As soon as you move the knight from c6, the b7 pawn drops, and as well as the c7 pawn. So I was going to mention that also if you move the bishop to open up the rook towards the bishop, the c6 knight will drop and you will lose all the pawns on your queen side. So that makes it super difficult for black, right? To push this bishop away from the square on d5.
And to make matters even worse is after a queen trade, you may think, all right, I got rid of my c pawn. That's not a problem. This knight will just wrap around up into c4, maybe to b6 or to d6. So this is a miserable position. And I would hate to have this from the black side here. It just looks so pleasant for white. As you're pointing out, this bishop can't move. This knight can't move. And g5 was played. But I'm already thinking, let me just go into this queenless position, bring my knight to d2, bring my knight to c4. The knight on f3 is the one piece that could be improved very easily.
And I like what Tania is doing here. She's trying to create some counterplay. She realizes she cannot do pretty much nothing on the queen side. So she's trying to create some play on the king side. It may not be super sufficient, or it may not turn out to be doing much, but at least she's trying something. And the queens are now off the board, so that should give some air to her position. But still, Eric has a fantastic position.
And now he's probably just winning a pawn. Bishop f7, followed by knight takes. Eric is playing unbelievable chess today. Like, I mean, I love his decision making. I love his speed. I really just like the types of positions he's getting. It's like more strategic than tactical. And I feel like he is, for the most part, converting without letting the advantage slip. Oh,
Rook f6.
Oh my gosh. I said it and he just...
It was missed by Tania. No. Rook f6 was in the position.
And I was just complimenting him for not letting his advantages slip, and then he allowed a tactic, but now he has a tactic of his own, and that's what happens, right? It's not a blunder, it's a gambit. Come on, Eric.
It's a gambit indeed. We haven't seen any gambits other than the Queen's Gambit today, so let's call the Please Blunders gambits indeed.
And oh gosh, that pawn on b7 was so important. Here comes a rook to the 7th rank. If that knight moves, bishop takes e5. Oh goodness. Oh goodness, just take this and then take this.
Yeah, this looks really messy, and all the tactics just work out for Eric for the simple reason that his pieces are just very well placed. Not much in danger at all.
Yeah. And here, Tania's probably just going to let her time run out. Nope, she resigns. But either way, the time has elapsed for the 3+1 time segment. And Eric is now up 12.5 to 2.5. So he is just dominating this match. He won this section 7-1.
Wow, what a score by Eric. And Tania is showing some great chess as well. Is it really a pity for her that she's not able to score more, because she's showing some great chess as well? But we are soon going to be switching to bullet, and I'm really curious to see if we're gonna see a closer score in the bullet portion of the match.
I laughed because we were talking about the great chess that was played, and then you said bullet. I'm like, no matter who's participating, there is no such thing as great chess and bullet. It's just pieces flying left and right, and whoever has the last pieces standing and is not getting checkmated or losing the clock, they win. So we'll see what happens as the chaos resumes in just a few minutes. This is the I'm Not Jim Speed Chess Championship, which is brought to you by chess.com.
Did you know you can watch top chess events right on your phone? You don't even need to download an app. Just open any mobile browser and head to chess.com/events. You can see what's happening right now, check out top games, see results, and so much more. Try it for yourself at chess.com/events.
Hi everyone, I'm sorry, but we're experiencing some technical difficulties here in the studio. I hope you'll be patient with us as we get things in order before we return back to the broadcast. This video will now play on loop. Hi everyone, we're experiencing some technical difficulties here in the studio. I hope you'll be patient with us as we get things in order for the broadcast to return. This video will now play on loop. Hi everyone. We're experiencing some technical difficulties here in the broadcast.
12.5, 2.5 is your score here at the IMSCC Speed Chess Championship. It's all Eric Rosen in this one. And Anamaya, if we're being honest, at least now Tania Sachdev can hopefully just relax and have some fun. The match is wrapped up, mathematically speaking. So let's just see some crazy bullet.
I'm really looking forward to the bullet portion of the match. Obviously, the match is pretty much over. It's really difficult to come back from this huge score difference. But I'm really hoping that indeed Tania is going to have some fun and we might see some crazy bullet games.
I'm hoping so. And I don't know if bullet is any fun for Tania. Personally, bullet isn't that fun for me. It's just stressful. And is it Eric's doing 28.40 at bullet?
Wow, what a rating!
This isn't going to be fun for Tania. I'm just going to throw that out there. Oh, goodness. Oh, goodness.
2800s are indeed built different, especially in bullet. That's going to be very noticeable. But who knows? We might see Tania feeling very different about this match now and just be like, okay, let's have fun and let's see what happens.
Look how quickly she's playing. She had more than she started with, and now she is down for the first time under a minute, and she's playing quickly. She's playing confidently. She's playing well. Let's see if she can continue that going forward here.
Ooh, there's a lot of problems along the C file already. Starting B4. Aye. And she's spending some time here because she realizes the problem. But I was going to say that because there's still 1 second increment in this portion of the match, you still might have some, it might still feel different than actual bullet without increments. So it might still feel somewhat different, but we see that Eric is already crushing it.
Yeah, it feels different, but it feels worse when you're the side down a piece. So there's the resignation. And all right, we'll see if Tania can strike back. But Eric gained a whopping 1 rating point for that bullet game victory.
Wow. Well, we're back to the London, and let's see how this position will develop. Since Tania has been able to check the line probably and find a way to do better in this opening, it might go well from the start. And she goes for this move, knight e4 again, but right now it's not too bad anymore.
Yeah, she's thrown in the c takes d4. So there are none of these tactics with the c5 pawn hanging. It's still likely going to be another position where you can play queen c2. And so Eric takes first, but I was going to say queen c2 first, would have attacked the knight, done the same thing he's been doing, trying to force black to play f5, so then white can take over the e5 square.
And probably black might want to play either c5 or e5. I would prefer to play c5 just to keep e5 in the position at a later stage, and c5 seems more direct for the time being. And we might see black taking over, okay, maybe not taking over, but at least take some control over the c file as the bishop on c8 will develop.
Yeah, you can bring a rook to c8 next, but it seems like with the queen running over to f7 to keep this pawn e6 protected, that white can just control the c file. In fact, after rook takes c8, if you take back with the rook, you would have dropped the a7 pawn. So rook c5, another good move by Eric, though.
Rook c7, and where is the tactic? The eval bar is saying that white has a clear advantage. I guess it's the clear advantage because the pawns are dropping on the queen side and the pawns will be able to push forward very soon. But Eric goes for the save queen a3 as he's obviously not in a rush whatsoever.
He's not in a rush, but I think there were rook takes c6 tactics because the end there was like a queen a8 picking up the rook on c6. So it doesn't really affect the position. White's up a pawn, has these passed pawns running up the queen side. So unless he walks into some kind of checkmate or like an f4, e3, f3 situation, it still should be great for Eric.
And yeah, with f5, you might be able to create some counterplay, but it should not be enough. White has the knight on d2 that is going to c4 now, but it will be able to support white's really well. Knight d6 is a threat in the position. If that's not possible, you might consider going to e3 to show some support to the king side, but there's no need for that just yet, as white has a really nice position and the attack is not happening just yet.
Although queen b3 walked into a pin, and rook a3, there's back rank problems. So that's why rook a3 didn't work. You would take on a3 after rook takes throw on a rook c8 check. So the black king needs to have an eye kept on it as well.
Queen b2, it is threatening knight b6 now. Okay. F3.
Nicely done by Eric with a little fork. And there's also rook c8 check and back rank mate. Oh,
the time. Oh, Tania flagged in a really interesting position. Still, anything was possible.
Anything was possible, but only one thing happened, and it was a victory for Eric Rosen. He is up 14.5 to 2.5. He gained another very important rating point, and he is up to 2842 bullet.
Wow, it's an insane rating, and it goes to show, I mean, Eric is very he knows what he's doing in this time control. We saw some emotes early in the chat. He has this dirty flag emote. It might not happen that much, those dirty flags, as there's an increment in this match. But yeah, seeing Tania flag in such an unfortunate way is obviously not the greatest to see.
Love g4 though. I love to see that move. She's throwing her pawns up the queen side, going for some potential attack here. Eric responded well with knight d4. Tania also responded nicely with bishop f4, attacking this pawn on c7. And
ooh, that's a big problem. Bishop takes c7, attacking the queen and the knight at the same time.
And she's thinking about it. You know, she sees it. I wonder if she's worried about some kind of queen sacrifice.
Oh, she doesn't do it.
Still a very good move though, because if you take this knight, the pawn will take. This h7 pawn will be hanging, c6, d5. This is still a great position, but she didn't grab a queen.
She had a great opportunity there with bishop takes c7, and you don't take the bishop, you don't take the knight with the bishop, but you could have taken with the knight to attack the rook again, and that would create even more problems for black. So now it's a very more or less solid position, not very tactical anymore, but obviously the tactics might still be there, as she takes on e4, allowing the bishop to move to open up the rook on e8 towards the queen.
Probably just bishop d6. Okay, wrong direction, but bishop e6 would have handed some double pawns to white, because there's no f6 anymore. Your bishop's in the way. You would need to play f6 to win this piece that's pinned.
Both players are around 20 seconds now on the clock. They are approaching time trouble situations, and black is pushing on the queen side. I was going to say white has a nice advantage on the king side, but oh, it's going really fast on the queen side.
And one of the early games of the match looked just like this, where there's a b4, c3 pawn, and now an opening of the queen side. This is just going to lead to checkmate very quickly. Take this pawn.
And yeah, rook a3, and Eric is just crushing it on the queen side. And as you mentioned, the pawn chain he's creating, we saw this a couple of times in the match already, and he uses this so well. He capitalizes on it very well as well.
Yeah, look at this. More pieces coming in. You take c3, down goes a2, down goes your king, and down goes your flag, because Tania, unfortunately, struggling to keep pace on the clock, and Eric gets another win, and Eric is just an absolute beast. So I'm going to take a moment here just to let everyone know that Tania is an amazing chess player, and her classical chess rating is actually higher than Eric's, and she had a really good showing in the Reykjavik Open. She beat a grandmaster in that tournament, and classical chess versus speed chess, very different disciplines. So Tania is a fantastic player. She just isn't that experienced. Online Blitz is not a priority of hers, so I just wanted to clearly state that.
Right, Robert, and she's also very well known as a commentator these days, so she is all around online a lot, but she's not playing herself, and that is obviously a big difference. We as commentators, we do quite frequently play, so we're not that much out of shape, as we can say, but Tania is a phenomenal player, but she just doesn't play as much online.
Yeah, she doesn't. And I was following her progress. I've known Tanya for a long time. I've commentated with her a bunch over the years, and we're friends. So I followed her result in Reykjavik. It was very impressive. It was a great showing, and I was happy to see that. And it's unfortunate when people get blown out in a match, but Eric is such a strong player himself that sometimes these things happen, no matter if you're in an IM tournament, if you're at the Super GM level, sometimes things just don't go your way. And one player is performing much better, and it's Eric today. He's great. So not taking anything away from him, but I just want to preempt all what I assume is going to be people calling out one of the players for not being good enough or whatever. Yeah, I'm just going to end that there.
Thank you, Robert. We really appreciate you for that. And we are back to a game, and Eric is really crushing it in this game again. He has a really nice and solid position. It's not the worst for Tanya, but Eric has such a solid position, and very little can go wrong here.
Yeah, what's the material count? 2 extra pawns right now. I guess A3 can be captured, so it's 1 extra pawn. I would go ahead and target this F7 pawn, win C7, down goes F7 next. This just feels like it's a pretty straightforward initiative for Eric.
And because of the opposite color bishops, White's bishop is so much stronger, being able to attack the pawn F7, whereas Black's bishop is not able to do much, and that is what's hurting Tanya's chances here.
And one thing to note is that this rook, okay, not anymore, that rook was needed to defend the rook on C1. So rook takes F7 was the move he wanted to play, but couldn't get away with. And Eric moves back the bishop to E4. I think Tanya should send the pawn, just hope that it goes the distance. But either way, her king is not in good shape.
Bishop F1, what a solid move, getting the bishop out of the way to make sure the pieces can do their job without getting distracted or disturbed by their own bishop.
Yeah. Oh, it's not mate.
Oh, he thought it was a checkmate.
Or he
tactic
thought
Bishop C4.
Exactly, right? Just to show that quickly, if rook G8, you take it, and after king takes, there's bishop C4 check, and you scoop up this rook on B3. And it said,
we saw another flag, I believe.
I'm gonna pull the game up. We have an analysis board, but we were just seeing the game turn around the eval bar. But after rook B8, rook A6 was played, and I think Tanya was in kind of pre-move mode or stress mode. Lost the queen on D6.
That's so unfortunate because she had a great pass pawn on A3, and she could actually sacrifice her queen to get the pawn on A3 going.
Wow. Yeah, actually, you're just winning straight up because queen D1 is met by rook to B1, and otherwise you're not stopping this queen from appearing on A1. So that was unfortunate for her, but that's been the theme of the day. Time trouble is not her friend. And Eric, well, maybe he's her friend in real life, but he has not been her friend in this match.
He is brutal, and it really shows his strength. He is just so experienced, so much better. And yeah, we're back in the Queen's Gambit, and this time, okay, both players have a solid position. I feel like Black is having a more active play, but White definitely has some chances here, bringing the back to C5 on a really nice square. So Tanya's definitely playing for something here.
Right. Yeah, no, there's a little bit of something going on. The C5 square is nice, but look at that. The knight gets into C4. So this is what we've been saying all day, is that Eric has been handling these positions so expertly. Like, I have been extremely impressed by the way he's played. The white side of the lung system, every single game was advantageous for him. But now with the black pieces, okay, well, now pawn's going down after you could take here. But even if you weren't winning a pawn as Black, you just have the position closed up, and the knight on C4 is a monster.
Indeed, and now the knight is never able to enter C5. You might still get the knight to C5, but as I wanted to point out, you want to play queen D4, knight C5, but Eric plays rook E4, not allowing queen D4 to happen anytime soon.
No, just nice move. You might think of bringing a second rook up into the action. You could think about playing D4 because after pawn takes, rook takes, there's a lot of pressure down the D file. Instead, he just backs the queen up to E7. Why not? You're up a pawn. You can do what you want. This queen can go back up to 6th rank. It does, and don't fall into any forks. That's the only thing.
And the knight goes to F4, but it's really well placed, and it's at least stopping Black's attack. But it's clear that White does not have many access points in Black's position, and Black has just a really nice and solid position. He can just take it easy, play Rook e7, and slowly improve the position even more.
I wonder how much you'd pay to put the pawn back on a2 so you could go b3, right, and kick this knight out of here. This knight is just holding everything together. It's keeping White from gaining any access in the position. Now the knight's retreating. The rook protects the pawn. The queen's free to go. And there it goes. With b2 is hanging as well.
It's impossible to get rid of this knight on c4. You can even consider taking the knight just to sacrifice the exchange and have some play here. But you don't have much counterplay, so it's simply not worth it.
Knight h2 and g3. There's no rook g4. So that's kind of interesting to point out because there's gh2 check and oh gosh, g3.
Oh, yeah, it looked like White was slowly coming back in the game as the queen becomes very active and now gets to b8 and back to g3.
Okay, defending everything and attacking g4. b2 has been hanging for an eternity, but it's just off the radar.
Rook to d1, probably wants to play some rook move to d4 to attack the pawn on e4, but g3 is in the position still.
Okay, knight d3, can't complain about that. And okay, this pawn is never going to be captured.
They don't like your moves pretty often, Robert. I'm sorry to say that.
It's okay. I'll forgive them eventually. But for now, that pawn was hanging rook d6. Bring that rook over here. King d5.
And to d4, okay. And the king is coming to the center.
Best position Tanya's had in like a million moves, and yet she might be in Zugzwang.
And take care of the clock. She's down to 4 seconds. She really speeds up.
Take the knight's hanging. There's no mate. The king runs away.
Oh wow, this seemed like a pre-move. I don't think b3 was expected.
Yeah, and that was a huge mistake because now Tanya's just up a piece. But look at Eric, rook f1, going for this f2 pawn.
It's definitely not over yet.
Okay, f2 is about to happen, especially now.
Ooh.
And now it's equal.
The king goes to g5, and the king is going to support the pawn.
This pawn is king
d4.
Oh, she dropped e3.
Rook takes e3. Oh no!
She's gonna lose on
time. Rook f3, and that's it. It's over. Oh, what an unfortunate way to lose. Tania had such a good position.
First she had a terrible position, and then Eric went for checkmate, but he left his knight on pre, and then Tania, unfortunately for her, it was tricky, right? The f2 pawn was captured, and then Black had a passer, but yeah, bullet, clearly not her forte.
Yeah, it's really difficult for Tania, and Eric is just showing up so strong. And, if you get one of Eric's pieces, like you win a piece against him, it's not over yet. He has so many tricks still up his sleeves. You really need to strike him a few times before you are able to get that full point. And it shows that Eric is in his true form right now.
Yeah, you can just see the form in every game, even when he blunders a piece, right? That was in a time scramble, so we understand it. But the way he was able to quickly make his follow-up moves shows that he's ready to play no matter the circumstances. But this position looks good for Tania, especially for a bullet game. There's open lines in front of White's king, and Black's king, for the moment, is not really under attack. So I like the way Tanya's handling this.
It seems like this is also the first time she played this opening against Eric's 1d4. So it looks like that's already a big improvement, and it shows her position is so much better. She has so much play. The open files on the queen side will matter a lot, and there's very little attack on the king side.
Right. And this bishop is under attack, so she needs to take care of that. Oh, she takes care of it tactically. I was just telling you to protect your bishop, but she would have trapped the queen if the bishop was captured.
Oh, that's why queen c2 has been played.
Queen c6, not sure about that move.
Yeah, you want to get your bishop to e4, but with this knight on c3, you want to get rid of it, but how?
That's a good question, but Eric done in 15 seconds was knight to d2, queen. Oh, she's maneuvering queen over here, and now she needs to distract this knight. Knight d5.
Oh, and now there's a clear threat. If you take on d5, queen takes a2, and checkmate in... okay, actually not checkmate, but it seems to be crushing either way.
Queen d3. 93 or 90, 93 is just good. Hitting the bit. Oh, queen e3 would have hung the queen.
The rook on h3.
Oh my gosh, I didn't see the queen. The rook was open up, but 93 is obviously better. Now it's a free piece, or rook's hanging
all
everywhere.
The pieces are dropping over there.
And by the way, Eric has 2.7 seconds, and Tania's the one with 20 seconds.
Yeah, this is looking much better already, but Eric is finding some resistance here. H6, it's not over yet. E5, queen g6.
Knight d4 is happening.
Really concerned.
Yeah, e5 is a great choice because you cannot allow that knight into f5. But here it comes. She stops it. No knight e3 for Eric. He wants it. Knight e3 now. There's bishop d3. Not anymore. Knight d1 protects the mate.
Ooh, gotta be very careful still. And Tania's going for the queen trade, which makes a lot of sense. Just simplify, get into an easier position. But where is the breakthrough?
Yeah, that's the problem. Is it is objectively a good decision, but it's not clear how Black breaks through just yet. And she's doing a great job opening lines for her rooks. Watch out for forks. Knight b6 is a
Not
fork.
so simple with the knight forks in a position. She's allowing knight b6, but it's still fine.
Yeah, just take this pawn over here. Yeah, this is also fine. This is a bad pawn.
She did not get the pawn on g4, but she still has a really nice pawn structure on the king side.
Right. You can even consider sacrificing one for the other, like h5 for f5 or f5 for h5. But oh my gosh, Eric's pawns are going.
I'm worried about the pawns.
No.
I've seen Eric's pawns push forward, and you do not want to face them.
Nope. And they're going. They're going to keep going, and I don't think they're going to be stopped. Oh, goodness.
And the e3 pawn is held back by the knight on c1.
Now it's hanging for free in the game. How does Eric do this?
It's just a magician.
And just two pass pawns.
Gotta play fast. Yeah, that was already lost position, but that was again such a nice position from Tania.
And she had 20 seconds to his 2 seconds, but with increment, you can never count a player out.
Right, and we're back to d4, and this time again a very complicated line. What is going on here?
A little Budapest gambit, h4, trying to get this bishop away from f2. b2 is hanging. There's a pin in the center. I won't pretend to know this position at all. I just know that Eric loves himself a good gambit.
Right. This is the first gambit, I believe, of this match, other than the Queen's Gambit. It's not really a gambit that we are talking about. But yeah, this looks really messy, Robert.
Yeah, this is tricky stuff here because already if you take this pawn with a knight, then bishop takes d2. And look at Eric. He has this all mapped out. And Tania's playing great. For somebody who's facing a gambit with tactics everywhere, she's really doing an excellent job. Wow.
Right, and this pawn on c7, like who would think that a pawn on would be on c7 of white? You don't see that often.
No, but she's doing everything perfectly. Like she's better, and she gave him an exchange. I guess Eric won the exchange, but what's the material count? Black has 4 pawns, white has 6, or 2 pawns, and a bishop for a rook.
And Eric seems to be collecting the pawn on c7, but still the pieces, as I was saying, that the pieces are just so much better placed. I mean, from white, it has so much more perspective.
And no, this is unfortunately she traded the bishops. I thought she should try to keep her dark squared bishop, still play for white, but now it's only 1 pawn and a bishop against a rook.
Right. White's tiny advantage was simply for the reason that she has so many minor pieces that could create some sort of play here. But now as the pieces are being traded off, it becomes much more clear that position that is. And as pieces are being traded off, the person that has more material will simply win.
Yes. And this bishop doesn't have a good diagonal to work with. It can't team up with a piece against a square. On the other side of things, this knight is trying to come to f4 with check. And look at Eric allowing a discover check, saying there's nowhere good for your knight to go. Sure, you can go knight g3. I move my king. My rook defends that knight over here.
It goes to d5. Tania's still trying to make something happen. This knight on h5 is not the greatest, so that's what Tania's trying to make use of. Now, if the rook takes h4, this knight on h5 is very, very vulnerable.
Yep. And now it's probably just lost.
Wow.
That was
Great
quick.
play by Tania.
Rook G3 check is probably what I would throw in here just to see if you play knight E3, which is not good because the rook could come to E8. And that's check.
Good catch.
Was Eric trying to catch Tania in a pre-move situation?
I have a feeling. Maybe this has already happened before, that he felt like he could catch her in a pre-move. But that was a really nice win by Tania.
Yep, she takes one there in the bullet. It cost Eric 15 rating points. So,
Oof.
yeah, his mug says treat every blunder as a gambit, but he's gambiting rating points with every single half point or more that he gives up. So, I don't think he's thrilled about that kind of gambit, but it was a fun game in the Budapest.
Right. We're happy to see he's using all of the everything that he's known for, the London system, all of the gambits that he has tried that exist. So yeah, obviously we love to see him trying out the Budapest gambit.
You know what this game reminds me of? So he played a Spanish, right, from the white side. It's like in the last round of a tournament where your result doesn't really matter. You're not going to win a prize. So you play a different opening just to get it in the database. So when somebody prepares for the next tournament, like, wait, Eric plays the Spanish? Now I have to prepare for this line. So I get the feeling that as he plays Levy next match, if Levy's looking at his recent games, he'll see this E4 thrown in there and now be like, I'm going to have to spend some time prepping for the king's pawn.
He was early in the chess, so he might be noticing this and being like, all right, he just plays this once and all the other times he plays D4. So, but yeah, you never know. Eric has definitely more openings ready. So there's a lot you need to prepare for.
Chess players are lazy. They don't look for context of what was played. They just go to the database. They see the number of games played with a move. It's like, wow, the most recent game had E4. They don't look to see the score or anything like that. And they just like, okay, well, this only happened once, so maybe I don't have to look at it. Or they see it's happened a number of times and forget that the person played as a child and not recently. So, maybe there's that. There's also this diagonal at some point. This 9.5 is great. Love that piece.
And might go to D4. There we go. And yeah, Tania doesn't have such a bad position. Look at this bishop on C2. It's not the worst. It can still go to B3 and control a nice diagonal, but it's not doing great on C2. It's covered by the pawns on D3 and E4. You'd rather have those pawns on dark squares or have the bishop out of that chain.
And the bishop's out of the chain. E5 could be played. Knight F5 also threatens knight takes H6 in addition to knight takes D4 because this knight on F6 is a little bit loose. So it feels like this king is about to come under fire. Maybe a rook lift and then knight F5. Not feeling good about black's position.
Me neither. Not anymore. As you pointed out, there's a lot of attack on the king side and there's very little counterplay for black.
So where's the knockout? Queen G4 with
E6. Oh, there's a lot of pressure on F7 pawn, and also E6 is in the air.
There's almost rook takes A6, knight takes F7, stuff like that. But instead he centralizes queen, and maybe just rook C1. Ooh.
Okay, wants to get rid of that rook on D2, which makes sense. The rook is a very active piece, so why not trade it off?
Okay, rook F1 threatening queen takes E6. Don't blunder that. Don't miss queen takes E6. Okay, moves out the way, but knight takes F7. Ah.
Knight still drops.
We have the
wait a second. He didn't expect that.
The rook.
He did not expect the capture on F7.
No, he did not. But that's how you have to play bullet. Just give up what you're going to give up and go from there. Oh, G2 is protected.
Yeah, both players are very low on the clock as well, so it makes a lot of sense.
Oh
my goodness.
Oh no, my queen. And that is how the match ends. Final score, 19.5 for Eric Rosen, 3.5 for Tania Sachdev. And Anamaya, we can't state it any other way. It was all Eric in this match.
It was all Eric. Eric was dominating this match throughout. Tania was showing some great resistance in a lot of games, but it was not enough. Eric is just so strong, so much more experienced in online chess, and it really showed in this short hand controls that Eric is just the better player.
For sure. Well, we are going to have an interview, so we are going to step aside for the moment. Don't go anywhere. We'll hear the thoughts of the players. And this I Am Not GM Speechless Championship show continues in a few. And we return here with the players. Eric, massive congratulations on a really fine performance. I guess the first thing I want to ask you about is that London system. I'm a hater, but you did turn me into somebody who appreciates the London when you play it like that.
Yeah, it's been a favorite opening of mine for a long time. So yeah, the line we went into is like kind of a new trendy line that Komsky's been playing recently. So yeah, seems to be getting good positions. And then I think at some point Tania deviated from what she was playing and then was playing it a bit more accurately. But had a lot of positions with like good knight versus bad bishop and then all these rook endings too. So a lot of positional play.
Right, and Taya, at the start, Eric's London was super powerful, but in 3+1 segment, we saw you make big improvements against this opening. Were you able to find some improvements during the break?
You know, this line, I just recently sort of seen it very quickly, and I thought I'd play it, and in the 5-minute portion, I completely forgot to take c takes d4 at every point. And then I felt I couldn't understand where it was going so wrong. And then we had this little break, and then I realized that I have to take on d4. Then the positions improved, but the results did not. But yeah, it was definitely better taking on d4. And I think that 5-minute portion was super hard, every position getting worse with black.
Yeah, definitely was an uphill battle from that start. And Eric, on your end, I noticed that your bullet rating is extremely high, probably the highest in the field. First of all, is that new? Have you been working on your bullet game, and what's the deal there?
Yeah, I've had a recent few like bullet binges where I've been farming some people online, but yeah, it's I think my bullet rating like a month ago was in the 2600s, but I went through a phase about a week ago where I was playing a lot and just trying to get used to moving quickly, get used to the pre-moves. So it's definitely an important part of a match like this.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Tanya, so you were going into the bullet match. Obviously, the score was not in your favor, but as you were going into the bullet match, you might feel like there's less pressure on you as you go, as you have such a big score difference. Did you feel less pressured going into the bullet match, and were you feeling like, let's have fun? How did you feel about it?
No, I think I just wanted to play as many games as possible. And I think I'd heard how good and strong Eric is in these formats. And today I got to see it for myself. And I think as we went into shorter time controls, he was just unstoppable. I mean, he's just so fast. And even if at times I managed to get something, it was I was just getting flagged everywhere. And even the few games that I managed to get a decent position. So I think as the time control went shorter, it was definitely harder. And yeah, it was, I mean, I think I kind of got adopted today.
Well, I'm not sure about it, but you definitely did a great job. The score doesn't feel like it shows enough of like what you're capable of, because you showed some really nice games to us today.
Yeah, I mean,
no, I mean, I think it's a lot to do with time control and time management. That's what online Blitz is all about, Blitz and Bullet, and it's such a big part of the game. So I don't think that's an excuse.
Yeah, well, speaking of time controls and playing, you went back over the board in a classical time control at the Reykjavik Open. You had a great performance. You were near the top of the standings throughout. So how did it feel to return to over the board play? And can you give us some insights into what we're about to see at the Olympiad in India? That must be incredibly exciting.
Yeah, it was really nice coming back to OTB chess in a proper classical format. I did play the world team, but that was sort of something between a rapid and a classical. And Eric was in Reykjavik as well, so it's a great tournament, and it's always nice to be there. I was playing after 2 years, a proper classical event. I think there was it was mixed feelings. There were nerves, but more or less just really happy to get back to the board, and it went well. About the Olympiad, of course, we're all super excited that it's happening in India. I think it's always one of those tournaments where you're really motivated to play for your team. But the fact that it's happening in India just makes it extra special. So really looking forward to everyone being here in end of July.
Awesome. Really looking forward to watching you very closely in that event as well. One more question from me for Eric. Eric, we've all been waiting for this moment. How are you feeling about the rematch against Levi Rosman?
That's a great question. I've been putting most of my focus into just preparing for this match, so I haven't really had time to think so far ahead. But yeah, Levy's been a friend of mine, rival of mine for these past championships. So the last time we played, we had epic battle, went into overtime actually, and he got the better of me. So yeah, I'll try and get revenge this time around.
Sounds great. Wishing you good luck already in your next match.
Thanks so much.
Thanks to both of you. So really appreciate it. It was a great match. I'm sorry it didn't go away, Tanya, but we always appreciate your great sportsmanship and love to see you play. So have a good one. It's probably pretty late by you, but we'll see more from you very shortly.
Thank you. And Eric, you were just so strong today, and continue doing that. All the best for your next match.
Thanks, Tanya. Appreciate it.
All right. Bye guys.
Take care.
See you.
Wow. I mean, just two incredibly great human beings, fantastic chess players, doing so much to help grow the game. And Eric Rosen, there could only be one. He is the player who moves on. And as we see in the right side of this graphic, I think this is the matchup that everybody cares about the most. Like, I know there's a whole tournament. There's a bracket. Danny's match yesterday was very exciting. But Eric Rosen versus Levi Rosman. Levi won round one. If Eric wins round two, do we get chess boxing? Like, do we finally get to see them duke it out both over the board and in the ring?
Well, that would be very exciting, Robert. I would love to see that. It's been in the talks these kind of last couple of days.
And I guess I have to ask you, Anna-Maya, with Levi being the higher seed going into the tournament, but Eric with that 2830 plus bullet rating. I mean, what do you make? Like, who do you see as the favorite in the match?
I think it's going to be a very close match. Levi is probably favored in the longer time controls, and at the same time, Levi is very strong in the bullet as well. But seeing that Eric has 2800 rating in bullet, it might get very close, and we will have to see. I think it will be decided on the very last game. I believe that was last year the same.
It was, and that makes it all the more exciting. But before we get to that match, we do have another IMSCC Speed Chess Championship match tomorrow. It is the 1 seed, Paulina Shuvalova, taking on David Pruis. David, he is a fantastic commentator. He is a great chess player. He doesn't play that much bullet chess. He's not trying to flag anybody. So he's in for a really tough match against Paulina, who goes by the username Flawless Fighter. She definitely is ready for a fight, no matter who her opponent is.
Right. It's only a matter of time until she gets the GM title, because she is a very talented player, very strong from a very young age, and she's only been rising and rising. So really looking forward to the match and really hoping to see that resistance from David and make it a more or less close match.
Yeah, and good point about Paulina. She's her FIDE rating has been over 2,500. She's quite a young and talented player, and she will definitely get that Grandmaster title. And I believe, we're not commentating together tomorrow because you're covering the Women's Speed Chess Championship. And if I'm not mistaken, Paulina is one of the players who is already in the main event, because she has proven herself time and time again. We see the list of players in the field, and there she is in the bottom right. I was correct. Whew. I knew she was in the field.
Ooh, she's in the bracket, and she got qualified. She got invited already to the main event of the WSCC. So it's really amazing, and we will see her back there as well.
Well, you will see the WSCC competitors tomorrow. I'll continue with the IMSCC Speed Chess Championship. And Anna-Maya, it was a blast. Time really flew in this match. It was a one-sided matchup. We know the score was heavily in Eric's favor, but there was still so much fun. And I had a great time analyzing with you.
Likewise, Robert, it was a lot of fun. And despite the match being one-sided, we still had a lot of fun going through the bullet games together, having a lot of fun there. So thank you so much, Robert. Thank you so much to everyone in the chat for your support. You're all amazing. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to our producer, Matt, as well, for being super helpful behind the scenes.
For sure. And the last thing I want to say before we leave is stop playing the French defense. On that note, bye, everybody. See you tomorrow with more chess. Enjoy the rest of your day.